politico, diciamo, dove c'erano le autorità politiche, dove c'erano le varie amministrazioni. Oggi abbiamo invece voluto organizzare un workshop e quindi nei nostri intenti un'assemblea che potesse interagire e discutere con i nostri colleghi americani relativamente a questi due aspetti che noi abbiamo intenzione di trattare oggi. Faccio qualche breve introduzione per chi non era presente ieri comunque qualcuno ha già sentito le cose che di Roma, è utile che vengano ripetute, no? E questa collaborazione nasce da un accordo che era stato fatto ancora l'anno scorso col governo americano, che aveva e che ha come importante obiettivo quello di riuscire ad allineare o comunque prendere anche poi degli spunti estremamente positivi dalle politiche americane relativamente a quelle che sono e alle strategie, a quelle che sono appunto le strategie antidroga, in modo da creare una collaborazione poi che sia molto fruttuosa su quelli che possono essere i tavoli internazionali che ci interessano molto, che sono quelli delle Nazioni Unite, per esempio, dove si discutono spesso delle risoluzioni che hanno un'importanza, direi, notevole nel condizionare poi le strategie dei vari Stati. Grazie. Noi abbiamo anche un altro obiettivo che abbiamo perseguito ancora l'anno scorso, era quello di attivare una collaborazione tecnico-scientifica con il principale istituto di ricerca del governo americano che fa capo all'NIH, quindi al sistema nazionale, diciamo, della salute americana, e che è NIDA, con cui abbiamo siglato con Nora Volkov, sempre in quest'Aula, l'anno scorso un altro accordo, subito dopo l'accordo che avevamo fatto a Washington, e sulla base di quello noi stiamo portando avanti una serie di progetti e di collaborazioni tecniche a vantaggio di tutto il sistema italiano. Ecco, questo vorrei che fosse molto chiaro e che le persone che sono oggi qui intervenute fossero consapevoli che tutte queste cose sono fatte nell'interesse del Paese, perché pensiamo effettivamente che aprire questi rapporti e dare queste possibilità di conoscere cose estremamente avanzate nel campo della ricerca, oltre che poter investire in ricerche sul territorio nazionale fatte in cooperazione con i ricercatori americani, a noi possa solo fare che bene. Ecco perché abbiamo invitato le regioni, abbiamo invitato i servizi pubblici, abbiamo invitato le comunità, le associazioni di volontariato, tutto ciò che di rappresentativo ci poteva essere in Italia. Noi poi, come sapete, è nostra tradizione, questi workshop, queste riunioni, questi meeting che facciamo vengono anche trasmessi via internet in maniera da poter avere e dare la possibilità a chi non si può muovere dal posto di lavoro, visto che spesso c'è difficoltà a trovare anche i fondi per le missioni, di poterli seguire. E tutto poi i materiali, la registrazione degli interventi vengono messi su internet e c'è la possibilità di creare, diciamo così, un'informativa e un'informazione estremamente efficace, estremamente tempestiva soprattutto. Ora, la collaborazione che noi abbiamo attivato è una collaborazione che possiamo dire da ambo le parti, ma lo sentirete anche da loro, estremamente efficace da una parte, ma anche soddisfacente. Il nuovo governo italiano è fortemente interessato a portare avanti e a consolidare questo tipo di collaborazione che vede investite non solo il Dipartimento per le politiche antidroga, ma anche tutte le altre amministrazioni interessate. Io ho piacere che ci siano qui rappresentate le varie amministrazioni, gli esteri, la salute, l'istruzione, la giustizia, eccetera, no? E perché, come dicevamo ieri, la questione è importante venga affrontata contestualmente da tutte quelle amministrazioni che hanno comunque una responsabilità nella programmazione e nell'organizzazione delle strategie prima e delle risposte poi concrete. Io mi augurerei per il futuro una sempre più partecipata presenza delle regioni e delle province autonome, con cui facciamo molta fatica, ma noi non disperiamo, siamo molto pazienti, no? Il mio nome è Giovanni, quasi da ricordare San Giovanni che era il patrono della pazienza, tra virgolette, per cui continueremo a proporre queste cose in maniera che si possa comprendere che nella lotta alla droga e nella lotta alle malattie infettive droga correlate non ci sono confini e non ci sono amministrazioni centrali e regionali. C'è un'amministrazione generalizzata, chiamiamola globalizzata, per darvi un termine, che deve rispondere ad un'esigenza del Paese, che è quello che ci siano sempre meno persone che usano droga e sempre meno persone che acquisiscono malattie di tipo infettivo o muoiono di overdose. Quindi lo sforzo deve essere comune e anche qui le divisioni politiche o tutte queste divisioni di competenza che ne derivano e che vanno rispettate per carità, ma vanno anche sfruttate al meglio dalla riforma del titolo quinto, credo che sia nella nostra Costituzione, credo che sia importante che facciamo un passo avanti, un passo indietro, un passo di lato, decidiamo noi, decidete voi, decidiamolo insieme, ma che ci sia un movimento coerente che va verso una soluzione del problema e non alla creazione di ostacoli e di non sfruttamento poi di risorse e di opportunità. Ora, quella che avete qua oggi, quella che abbiamo qua oggi è una grandissima opportunità, come è l'opportunità che stiamo creando di accedere per esempio anche ai fondi europei, altra questione che riguarda la questione internazionale europea in questo caso, e che invece è sfruttata dal nostro Paese praticamente zero. Cioè tutti i soldi che l'Unione Europea mette a disposizione per i progetti, per le tossicodipendenze, per la prevenzione, per tutta una serie di altre cose, dagli italiani vengono sfruttati praticamente zero. Ecco, tutte queste cose a noi come Dipartimento interessano moltissimo, quindi creare workshop dove poter portare una nuova ventata innovativa, se volete, ma neanche tanto per gli altri paesi, perché siamo il fanalino di coda forse in Europa su queste cose, no? Sto parlando dello sfruttamento delle risorse europee, è un impegno che il Dipartimento e tutte le altre amministrazioni si sono presi a carico e che spero appunto che le regioni abbiano il buon senso di capire che è una bella opportunità per tutti noi. Detto questo, oggi pomeriggio c'è anche un incontro col Presidente Monti, che è molto interessato e che è tornato dagli Stati Uniti dopo quell'incontro con il Presidente Obama, che voi avete visto sicuramente riportato da tutti i media, e noi riporteremo l'ottima impressione, l'ottimo risultato che abbiamo avuto nell'incontrare la delegazione americana qui presente, che al di là dell'alta competenza tecnica e di conoscenza che ha della materia, devo dire che ha anche un alto spessore umano che ci ha estremamente colpito e che ci ha convinto che oltre all'evidence based e oltre a tutta l'esperienza che serve poi una carica emozionale, una carica umana che abbiamo ritrovato in questi nostri colleghi americani e che ci hanno dato anche a noi un'ulteriore motivazione a continuare su questa strada. Il Ministro Andrea Riccardi, devo portare i saluti del Ministro che è stato convocato, quindi non potrà essere con noi questa mattina, è stato con noi ieri mattina. Ieri ha dato alcune linee di indirizzo, le aveva già date al capo dipartimento chiaramente, ma io le ribadisco perché credo che sia importante anche voi che sappiate quali possono essere le priorità di questo Ministro. Sicuramente la prima priorità è il carcere, cioè lui la prima cosa che mi ha detto quando è entrato: ci dobbiamo occupare di ulteriormente mettere a disposizione e creare delle condizioni che siano estremamente più agevolanti l'uscita dal carcere delle persone tossicodipendenti, quindi lo sfruttamento tra virgolette dell'articolo 94, che voi conoscete meglio di me, ma ci siamo dati anche due obiettivi: quello di creare delle altre opportunità relativamente a quelli che durante il processo per direttissima dovrebbero entrare in carcere, ma se fosse possibile nella prima fase non farle neanche entrare attivando il programma alternativo lì. Già c'era stata un'esperienza interessante che era quella del progetto DAP prima, se non ricordo male, e che andrebbe ripresa ed è riportata anche nel nostro piano d'azione. E il secondo gruppo di persone interessate sono quelle in attesa di giudizio, che non hanno ancora i definitivi, che quindi dovrebbero in qualche modo fruire ancora di più di questo tipo di misure alternative. È chiaro che per costruire questa cosa servono più accordi, perché bisogna mettere d'accordo la magistratura di sorveglianza, bisogna mettere d'accordo le regioni che dovrebbero in qualche modo acquisire dei nuovi costi, perché se aumentano le persone che escono dal carcere aumentano poi anche i costi che possono essere quelli relativi all'inserimento di queste persone nei servizi pubblici o nelle comunità terapeutiche. E poi servono gli accordi anche con le comunità terapeutiche, perché noi abbiamo creato un progetto in cui già nelle settimane prossime ci sono già state una serie di riunioni con il Formez, che è un'agenzia, un'organizzazione estremamente importante, interessata e organizzata per sostenere queste cose, dove andremo a incontrare queste compagini creando, diciamo così, un percorso sia di formazione sia di sperimentazione di nuovi modelli. Abbiamo già scritto delle linee di indirizzo che credo conosciate tutti, se non le conoscete le possiamo fornire, sono scaricabili dal sito ma le possiamo anche fornire in cartaceo, e sulla base di questo diciamo, stiamo dando concretezza a quello che era la prima priorità. La seconda priorità che ha detto il Ministro era relativamente alla prevenzione. La prevenzione è quello che ha detto del Ministro, ma anche la mia opinione, l'arma vincente per il futuro. Se noi investiamo bene sulla prevenzione, necessariamente ridurremo il numero dei consumatori e quindi di conseguenza tutta una serie di problematiche correlate al fatto che le persone consumino o non consumino droghe, ma anche alcol o altre sostanze. La prevenzione però va declinata, va mirata, va definita, perché parlare di prevenzione in termini generici o in termini universali sapete che comporta una scarsa efficacia ormai. Ecco, quello che io mi sento di dire sempre come introduzione ai lavori è che su questi due aspetti, quindi sul carcere e sulla prevenzione, noi abbiamo interloquito con i colleghi americani chiedendo a loro di darci degli stimoli, delle loro opinioni, che ci raccontino anche le loro esperienze. Quindi da una parte degli esperti che si occupano di riduzione della domanda e quindi di prevenzione, e dall'altra parte un giudice importante, il giudice Rancourt, che spiegherà a noi quali possono essere le modalità con cui gli Stati Uniti attivano queste misure alternative. Si chiamano drug court, non sono molto conosciute in Italia. Noi siamo stati negli Stati Uniti, siamo andati all'interno di un tribunale a vedere cosa succede fisicamente, come interagisce il giudice con queste persone, quando applica questo tipo di procedura, che outcome, che esito di questo, chiamiamolo trattamento, ha nella ricaduta, nella questione criminale o nella questione dell'uso di sostanze. Ben consapevoli, e spero che anche voi lo siate, ma se no ve lo rinfresco io, il concetto, che c'è una legislazione leggermente diversa fra noi e loro. Non tanto diversa, ma leggermente diversa. La parte, per esempio, del consumo di sostanze è considerata ancora un reato, quindi va nel penale nella situazione. Dopodiché il giudice ci spiegava molto bene ieri che al primo, diciamo così, episodio non viene chiaramente applicata la sanzione dell'arresto con tutta una serie di altre cose, no, ma questa viene graduata. Però concettualmente la diversità fra noi e loro è che il consumo qui è depenalizzato, quindi c'è una sanzione amministrativa, no, mentre là il consumo è ancora penalizzato. Dentro questo contesto esiste, come da noi esistono le alternative al carcere, esistono appunto questi percorsi che sono percorsi a impostazione federale, cioè vuol dire che sono valevoli su tutti gli stati, negli Stati Uniti, ma con delle varianti di applicazione da Stato a Stato in base anche alle singole legislazioni e alle singole disponibilità di giudici e di tribunali nel fare queste cose. Quindi hanno un po' la stessa situazione, un po' più alla grande rispetto a quello che abbiamo noi con le regioni, no? Anche se la legislazione nazionale, per fortuna, per quanto riguarda la giustizia, non risente troppo della questione, l'applicazione della legge, no, della questione regionale, ma risente comunque della disponibilità regionale ad accogliere il paziente, perché in tante regioni sappiamo che se dicono non abbiamo i fondi per poter portare queste persone fuori dal carcere, indipendentemente che sia un diritto esigibile, questa è la nostra opinione, è un diritto esigibile che non potrebbe essere negato, no, molte persone ancora restano all'interno del carcere. Apro una piccola parentesi, noi crediamo che i diritti esigibili di questo tipo collegati a persone che hanno una malattia, perché se viene definita e diagnosticata una tossicodipendenza, noi tutti, al pari dell'OMS, lo consideriamo, e del NAIDA che ha definito queste cose qui, una malattia prevenibile, curabile e guaribile, con un andamento cronico recidivante, ma sicuramente uno stato patologico di una persona che, se chiede delle cure alternative al carcere, non può non avere risposta. Se noi la equiparassimo, perché io sono un internista, quindi faccio anche un medico internista, poca fatica a fare questa equiparazione, ma a malattie altrettanto croniche, come il diabete o l'ipertensione, queste sono diritti esigibili, le cure. E siccome il carcere non mi risulta fino ad oggi che sia stato uno strumento di cura, non ci sia nessuno studio scientifico che dimostra che le persone in carcere guariscono, anzi forse peggiorano, no, credo che l'orientamento che stiamo prendendo sia non solo umanamente condivisibile ma anche scientificamente. Questa era un po' un'introduzione dovuta. Io ho 2 o 3 diapositive per ricordare che cosa, e poi passo la parola alla dottoressa Simeoni che presenterà gli ospiti e le amministrazioni, che noi abbiamo un piano nazionale d'azione, è un piano nazionale d'azione governativo approvato dal precedente governo, totalmente condiviso e riconfermato dall'attuale governo, l'ha detto testualmente ieri il nostro Ministro, che ha intenzione e dà continuità all'azione relativamente all'azione antidroga, che è appunto contenuta nel piano d'azione. Abbiamo anche un altro documento che vi invito a leggere, che è quello delle politiche, delle strategie, che poi è stato declinato appunto nel piano d'azione. Il nostro piano d'azione, mi passi la prossima per favore, è un piano d'azione che deriva direttamente dalla lettura e dalla condivisione dei piani d'azione europei, ma anche nella analisi dei singoli piani d'azione dei vari paesi che hanno molto a che fare con noi e che hanno delle collaborazioni tra l'altro molto strette. La prossima. Il nostro piano d'azione si sviluppa concettualmente in 4 parti. Le prime sono le indicazioni strategiche, ma non basta, e questo l'avevamo già visto gli anni scorsi, dare le indicazioni strategiche. È necessario poi pensare che questi piani d'azione vengano declinati in piani d'azione regionali, che sono quelli che hanno veramente i fondi, la responsabilità di programmazione, di organizzazione dei servizi per dare delle risposte concrete. Quindi noi abbiamo chiesto alle regioni di acquisire il piano d'azione generale, già 12 regioni lo hanno acquisito, e di declinare dei piani regionali concreti dove sia effettivamente definito quali sono gli indicatori, gli obiettivi, gli indicatori e quindi le modalità con cui controllare queste azioni con l'impatto. Però ancora una volta, se non c'è un'altra componente che anche qui non era mai stata fatta prima, che è la componente tecnico-scientifica, cioè diciamo che bisogna fare la prevenzione ma dobbiamo dire anche come, quindi delle linee di indirizzo scritte relativamente alla prevenzione piuttosto che alla cura o alla riabilitazione sono state messe a punto dal nostro Dipartimento e inserite in questo piano d'azione. Tutte queste cose lo sapete, le potete scaricare dai siti. Oltre a questo, ed è la nota più impegnativa e a volte molto dolente, una volta che ci siamo messi d'accordo dove andare, abbiamo tracciato la rotta, abbiamo fatto gli accordi con le regioni, abbiamo anche fatto i manuali tecnici, servono dei progetti che, finanziati, riescono a supportare concretamente quelle che sono le intenzioni del libro dei sogni, che è appunto il piano d'azione. Ora, in Italia c'è una cattiva abitudine, io ho definito cattiva abitudine, che era quella di dare i soldi centrali alle regioni e le regioni si arrangiavano a fare questi progetti e poi non si sapeva mai esattamente quali, come, l'efficacia, eccetera. Noi abbiamo cambiato da 3 anni e mezzo a questa parte questa abitudine dicendo è il Dipartimento che attiva dei network nazionali di progettazione, controlla e dirige direttamente le operazioni di progetto, per comprendere se effettivamente c'è un impatto poi sul fenomeno e quindi non semplicemente con una allocazione di fondi presso una o l'altra regione, ma con una vera struttura di project management che permetta di controllare quelli che possono essere le azioni e quindi i risultati sulle principali aree di piano che sono state identificate. Abbiamo attivato oltre 150 progetti, ci sono almeno una decina di network di centri cosiddetti collaborativi e c'è un budget messo a disposizione, lo dico piano perché io ho sentito i budget che hanno i colleghi americani e noi siamo non i parenti poveri, ancora più poveri, no? Perché siamo riusciti ad investire al massimo dai 35 ai 40 milioni di euro, che per noi è una cifra in questi anni molto forte e che stiamo ottimizzando al massimo, no? Ma che rispetto ai 20 o 40 miliardi di dollari che ho sentito che loro dedicano a queste cose è una cifra leggermente diversa. Ma noi avevamo molta fantasia. La prossima. Ecco, questa è la struttura concettuale, il modello delle 5 aree di intervento e con questa poi chiudo il mio intervento, che voi sapete, ve lo ricordo, che sono le aree prioritarie di intervento. Allora, l'intervento innanzitutto è un intervento che noi definiamo bilanciato, cioè vuol dire che se da una parte crede che sia importante attivare interventi, strategie e percorsi sulla prevenzione, sul trattamento, sulla riabilitazione e la reintegrazione, dall'altra parte ritiene, ed è il punto 5, che la legislazione e il contrasto del traffico dello spaccio sia altrettanto importante. Quindi molto chiaramente e fuori dai denti la strategia non contempla nessuna legalizzazione di sostanza. È una strategia per noi non percorribile né legalmente, né politicamente, né scientificamente. Abbiamo anche scritto nelle nostre politiche le ragioni del perché riteniamo tecnicamente non sostenibile la legalizzazione in questo senso, no? E quindi dentro questo approccio che da una parte combatte il traffico e lo spaccio, ma dall'altra parte con un'uguale intensità, se non maggiore, attiva interventi di prevenzione, trattamento e riabilitazione, sta la nostra formula. Ecco, questa formula prima o poi viene sostenuta e noi sempre di più stiamo portando avanti queste cose col punto 4, cioè che se vuoi capire se stai andando bene, stai contrastando un fenomeno, devi monitorare. E quindi i sistemi di valutazione sono importantissimi e introdurre il concetto che ciascun intervento deve essere evidence-based, ma non basta evidence-based, deve essere anche monitorato e valutato con indicatori quantitativi di outcome, è un concetto fondamentale. È un concetto tra l'altro che noi, per essere ancora più vincolanti, abbiamo detto questo fatto, cioè di avere un sistema di valutazione che mi faccia capire l'esito, è un criterio di finanziabilità. Cioè, se hai questo puoi essere finanziato, almeno noi finanziamo solo progetti che si fanno valutare e che possono darci poi la possibilità perlomeno di capire se ha funzionato o non funzionato, che mi sembra il minimo, ma vi assicuro che fino adesso non è stato così. Non voglio dare la colpa a nessuno, però diciamo che è un problema che dobbiamo risolvere e noi stiamo tentando di risolverlo così. L'ultima cosa che vi dico, relativamente alla prevenzione, proprio perché di necessità dobbiamo fare virtù, noi abbiamo indicato che gli interventi di prevenzione, d'accordo sulla prevenzione universale, d'accordo concettualmente, ma se facciamo solo ed esclusivamente prevenzione universale spendiamo un sacco di soldi, vorremmo trasformare probabilmente la società per risolvere i mali della società e far sì che la gente non vada più a utilizzare sostanze, ma non è sostenibile. Quindi noi abbiamo dato indicazione che la prevenzione importante, quelle più importanti che bisogna perseguire sono la cosiddetta prevenzione selettiva e indicata, cioè andiamo a tentare di cogliere quelle che possono essere le persone che hanno più rischio, e di solito sono appunto quelli che hanno in giovanissima età disturbi comportamentali, deficit attentivi, disturbi del comportamento, come vi dicevo, e quindi è possibile attraverso una tecnica che noi abbiamo definito, mutuandola chiaramente da tante altre governi e stati e organizzazioni che hanno usato questa, l'early detection, cioè noi dobbiamo fare una diagnosi precoce, trasformandola e traducendola in termini medici, il prima possibile sia delle condizioni di rischio, prevenzione selettiva, ma poi la prevenzione indicata anche di quelle persone che cominciano ad utilizzare, ad avvicinarsi droghe, non aspettare come passano 7-8 anni prima che queste persone dall'inizio d'uso arrivino ai nostri servizi, perché quel tempo è un tempo perso. Durante quel tempo avvengono processi di maturazione cerebrale che non possono essere interferiti da sostanze, non dovrebbero essere interferiti da sostanze, perché poi quel tipo di cervello che è maturato sotto l'effetto anche per lungo anni di sostanze, cannabis compresa, che è quella meno percepita come pericolosa ma probabilmente più pericolosa, no? Non avrà lo stesso risultato, non arriverà allo stesso risultato di maturazione. Su questo abbiamo prove ed evidenze che derivano dalle neuroscienze, quindi il fatto che noi intercettiamo il prima possibile questi giovani, li mettiamo in percorsi che sono più di stampo educativo che farmacologico, perché adesso abbiamo 180.000 soggetti in terapia con metadone, ma non è pensabile che gli altri che stanno usando sostanze, che sono circa 2,5 milioni di persone, possano essere semplicemente curati con dei farmaci, specialmente se sono giovanissimi. I minorenni dobbiamo pensare a degli approcci educativi, ma gli approcci educativi vengono sostenuti di più ed è possibile portarli avanti e sono molto più efficaci anche con approcci di breve termine, sto parlando dagli 8 ai 14 mesi di intervento, e chi si occupa di tossicodipendenze da anni sa che 8-14 mesi sono un tempo di trattamento che è breve rispetto a quelli che siamo abituati a vedere, no? Questo tipo di approccio permette di affrontare prima il problema, risolverlo prima e con meno sforzi. Questa è anche la mia esperienza personale negli ultimi 4 anni di attività clinica, che faccio ancora chiaramente solo però nel fine settimana, e mi sono reso conto che facendo questi approcci nei giovanissimi si ottengono dei risultati interessanti, chiaramente col coinvolgimento della famiglia e soprattutto nei minori. Ok, questa era un'introduzione dovuta, che vi fa capire qual è l'orientamento, il contesto del Dipartimento dove andiamo. Vi stiamo distribuendo i vari documenti che io vi ho detto e vi ho elencato precedentemente, quindi adesso passerei la parola alla dottoressa Simeone per la presentazione degli ospiti. Il programma prevede che gli ospiti facciano queste relazioni e alla fine di ogni relazione si può interagire e si può, anzi mi aspetterei una discussione, una serie di domande, perché siamo qua apposta per poter scambiarci le nostre opinioni. Grazie.
Grazie, buongiorno a tutti e grazie per essere intervenuti a questa giornata. Sono sicura che troverete questi interventi assolutamente interessanti e ricchi di spunti di estremo rilievo. Come diceva prima il capo dipartimento, la collaborazione con il governo degli Stati Uniti è iniziata a consolidarsi nella scorsa Commissione Stupefacenti a marzo dello scorso anno. Si è poi rafforzata dopo la firma sottoscritta dal deputy Mineta qui presente, sottoscritta lo scorso luglio direttamente a Washington con un memorandum of intent. Io ritengo che lo scambio di best practice, di esperienze, la messa in comune delle lesson learned tra i nostri due paesi sia assolutamente interessante e debba essere assolutamente implementata ed incentivata. È con estremo onore quindi che mi accingo ora a presentarvi i nostri ospiti. Il dottor Mineta fa parte del ONDCP, che è l'ufficio che fa parte dell'ufficio esecutivo del Presidente Obama. Il dottor Mineta il 22 giugno del 2010 è stato riconfermato dal Senato degli Stati Uniti d'America nel ruolo di vice direttore dell'ufficio della riduzione della domanda. Il dottor Mineta sovrintende la sezione per la riduzione della domanda e promuove programmi di prevenzione e trattamento con particolare attenzione agli individui che intraprendono un percorso di recupero. Già nel 1996 aveva ricoperto il ruolo di manager per programmi di prevenzione rivolti ai giovani e nel 2009 ha collaborato con il Center for Substance Abuse Prevention National Advisor Council. Prima di far parte dell'ONDCP, il dottor Mineta è stato membro dell'Associazione Americana di Salute Pubblica e della Community Antidroga Coalition of America. Passo poi a presentare il dottor Jack Stein, il quale ha il compito di coordinare le attività sviluppate nell'ambito della strategia nazionale di controllo sulle droghe. In precedenza è stato anche direttore della sezione relativa al miglioramento dei servizi del SAMSA, in cui si è occupato della gestione di finanziamenti destinati a programmi sulla droga relativamente all'HIV ed AIDS. Il dottor Stein ha anche ricoperto funzioni presso il National Institute of Drug Abuse. Quindi poi presentiamo il dottor Kevin Sabet, consulente della Scuola di Medicina dell'Università della Florida, attualmente anche consulente in UNICRI e ha collaborato come consulente all'amministrazione Obama, Bush e Clinton. Quindi, list but not least, sono particolarmente onorata di avere come nostro ospite il giudice Robert Rancourt della Corte del Distretto della Contea di Chicago nel Minnesota. Dal 1979 il giudice è membro della Corte Suprema del Minnesota ed è il presidente del Consiglio direttivo dell'Associazione Nazionale di Esperti delle Corti sulle Droghe. Numerose sono le sue partecipazioni a conferenze in tema di droga e sugli effetti che possono derivare dall'abuso di sostanze. È stato tra i primi giudici ad aderire al programma di formazione della Fondazione per le Famiglie. È stato inoltre promotore di quella parte delle corti delle droghe che si occupano in particolar modo dei giovani. Quindi, come diceva prima il capo dipartimento, passeremo adesso alla loro presentazione e poi daremo ampio spazio alle vostre domande. Grazie.
Bene, possiamo cominciare subito allora. Allora, il primo intervento è previsto di David Mineta. Take the floor, David. Okay.
Thank you very much, Professor Serpelloni. First off, I would like to thank again the Department of Anti-Drug Policies for hosting this and hosting our delegation here, and also for the wonderful hospitality that we've enjoyed over the last several days. I'd also like to thank the ministries for being here as well, Health, Justice, Education, Interior, and for their work and their coordination and collaboration with the Department of Anti-Drug Policies. That type of collaboration, intergovernmental collaboration, is essential for these policies to actually work. I'd also like to thank the regional governments for being here and their participation in this. As we know so well in our country, working with the states and the regions and the localities, again, is essential for the success of the policies. And lastly, and importantly, also to the non-governmental organizations who are here, who came out this morning for this important meeting. I'd like to say thank you also for your participation. Most recently, about a year and a half ago, I was still running programs, prevention and treatment programs in the San Francisco Bay Area, and had been doing so over the last 20 years. It's nice to be also with the actual providers of the services. As Professor Serpelloni and Dr. Simeone pointed out, last July we signed a memorandum of intent between Italy and the United States, and this was to exchange research, best practice, and drug policies, and to further our international partnership. 2 points I think I'd like to just highlight. One is that the National Drug Action Plan that the professor highlighted just a second ago, I just wanted to say how important that document is and for our learning and what we take back to the United States as well. And also we will be taking back the main principles of the Italian position against drug use. Both of those documents, I think, are very important in this exchange and in our international discussion around drug policy. Some of the points I think that I have already learned from the National Drug Action Plan that I think is so critical in both of our countries and worldwide is that drug policy and the environment that we are working in has changed significantly over the last 5 and 10 years. And the National Drug Action Plan makes a very special point of highlighting that. And for those in the field, that is very, very important, how the field and how things are changing as far as drug policy and addiction and dependency are concerned. I think it's important that, again, just to reiterate that how much the United States government appreciates Italy's close cooperation between our countries on drug control policy, and that we absolutely look forward to cooperation on drug-related public health research, exchange of best practices, and strategic communication in these international forums on the importance of evidence-based, balanced, and particularly humane drug policies. And I'd like to thank Italy for their leadership in all of these areas. Now I'd like to begin just with a little context to this discussion. I'm sorry. Thanks, Con. Just a little bit about me. Again, I was most recently doing either treatment services, prevention services, or running programs that provided those services locally. And so in many ways, that the expertise that Dr. Serpoloni, Dr. Simeone, and also the rest of the panel who is here with me from the United States delegation, have been very important to me in the field in our direct provision of services. And it is important that those of us who are providing those services directly have a strong link with the researchers, with the policymakers. And I think this is important both in the United States and in Italy. A little bit about ONDCP. As the professor said, ONDCP is the President's Drug Policy Office. And for that, we advise President Obama on all federal drug policy. As a result, we produce a national drug control strategy annually. It is the nation's plan on how to deal with substance abuse and addiction and dependency. We also oversee the budget, the drug control budget, and also coordinate federal response in the federal interagencies. There are about 35 federal agencies and departments that we coordinate around drug policy. The panel, I'd like to actually just highlight also the panel that is here today. As I said earlier, again, for those of us who are providing direct services, we rely heavily on research and policy experts. And I am very fortunate to have worked with and am working with field experts in the United States. One, I'd like to again say thank you and introduce Dr. Jack Stein, who is our prevention branch chief in our office. In the Office of Demand Reduction, we have prevention, intervention, treatment, and a recovery branch. And Dr. Stein is the head of our recovery branch. Also, for about a year and a half, over a year, I had the good fortune of working with Dr. Sabet at ONDCP as well. And Kevin, in addition to yesterday being his birthday, and he turned 20. He's amazing. It's amazing. No, he's not that young. He's young, but he's not that young. Yeah. And this is his third time through a White House Drug Policy Office, advising President Obama, President Bush, and President Clinton. Is very important that Kevin brings an enormous level of experience in drug policy to this discussion. And lastly, Judge Rancourt, who is, and you will see and hear, drug court come to life, and you will see what's really important. The best part is if you ever see the judge, or you see a judge skilled in drug court, you can be in their courtroom. It is phenomenal what skilled judges do around in the drug courts. So in your National Drug Action Plan is listed many principles upon which the policy is developed. We too, in our National Drug Control Strategy, have foundational principles. And our principles are based on the fact that the consequences and use of drugs harm every part of society. They not only affect the individual, they affect the family, they affect the neighborhood, they affect the larger community, and then also they put burdens on our health system, on our criminal justice system, on our educational system, and what we are finding out more and more on also all walks of life, on our military as well in our country. What we know is drug addiction is a disease of the brain that can be prevented and successfully treated, and that we can have policies that will help maintain long-term recovery. The other aspect or principle that upon which this is founded is also that the criminal justice system can and must be improved to break the cycle of drug use, crime, and incarceration and rearrest. And we have some great examples, and Dr. Sabet and Judge Rancourt will talk specifically about those efforts in our country. So again, the U.S. National Drug Control Strategy is a government-wide effort, in that we can't really make significant inroads in this and successes unless it is a government, a whole of government approach, and that is across the federal government as well as between the federal government, our state governments, and our local governments. We have to tie this, the strategy and the policies to data, science, and research. President Obama has made that very clear, that he wants federal policy to be grounded in data and evaluation and science. So this approach is a balanced approach. It is a retooling of our national drug control policy so that it is both a public safety policy, balanced policy with public health. And for the first time in many, many years, the demand reduction side, reducing demand for drugs, plays as a balanced approach and a balanced solution to the problem of our nation's drug substance use problem. So the core areas, these are the core areas that are in our national drug control strategy, and I have to say that these core areas match up very, very well with your national drug action plan. So we have to strengthen efforts to prevent drug use in our communities, and I have to say, in this administration, more so than I think I've seen in the last 20 years, has talked about prevention more than I have heard in the last 20 years. Not just on substance abuse, but prevention and wellness across health indicators. Also seeking early intervention opportunities in healthcare, and these two are related, and integrating treatment for substance use disorders into healthcare and supporting recovery in general. When we talk about recovery, I think the translation is rehabilitation and reintegration in your National Drug Action Plan. In addition, we want to break the cycle of drug use, crime, delinquency. Again, that spotlight on the criminal justice reforms and new efficiencies and effectiveness around criminal justice. Clearly, we want to disrupt drug trafficking and production. One of the areas that we've seen a steady decline in use of cocaine has been in successful interdiction policies outside of the United States, both crop eradication as well as supply reduction before it gets into the United States. And we've seen that specifically for cocaine. Strengthening international partnerships. This is something that Minister Riccardi said yesterday, and I think that a lot of his work really points specifically to this, is again, and that Professor Serpelloni talked about, is these international partnerships and how key this is on the demand reduction side. Now, many years law enforcement's worked on the supply reduction side, but it is vitally critical that all of us talk on the demand reduction side and know what each other's doing. And finally is improving information systems to better analyze and access data around drug use and its consequences. And I'll show you a little bit of this data in a second. Just so you know, put into context, demand reduction funding right now, we are in fiscal year 2012. Overall, our spending is on demand reduction is about $10.1 billion. Of that, treatment sees $8.7 billion, and prevention sees about $1.4 billion, out of a total of, again, a little over $25 billion in the National Drug Control budget. This is related to what we estimate to be a $193 billion problem around the use of illicit drugs. That's in health costs and in criminal justice costs. So this is what it looks like as far as prevalence in our country. The past month, cocaine and methamphetamine use, as I said earlier, is going down, a steady decline for cocaine since 2006. And a fairly steady decline in methamphetamine use since 2006 as well. One of the things that we think has worked very, very well is crop eradication in Central and South America, particularly in Colombia. And it has affected both price and purity of cocaine in the United States. This is data on U.S. prevalence of past month use of selected illicit drugs. And this is age 12 or older over an 8-year period from 2002 to 2010. Illicit drug use is 8.9%. I have to say affected largely by increase in marijuana use across age groups, particularly across young people, though. Psychotherapeutics, slight increase in cocaine and hallucinogens. And I have to say the psychotherapeutics, we have a significant problem around our prescription drug problem in the United States. So much so that the Center for Disease Control, CDC, has called it an epidemic in our country. Specifically around marijuana, we wanted to point out something that our data is showing us that is very, very problematic to us, and this is our 12th graders' past year marijuana use versus perceived risk of occasional marijuana use. The blue line is past year use, which continues to go up at an alarming rate for us. But what is really alarming as well for us is the perceived risk is going down. is that kids in our country, particularly the 12th graders, are saying that they don't think that occasional use of marijuana is a problem. And as a result, we think that is also tied to, related to, this increased use. One of the issues that we have that, as I said earlier, is that prescription drugs, but we also have problems around synthetic drugs that I believe the professor told us that is referred to as smart drugs here in Italy and maybe other parts of Europe. These are synthetic marijuana, K2, spice, and synthetic cocaine, bath salts. We have seen increased reports to our U.S. poison control centers of problems and overdoses with both of these drugs and synthetics. 1 in every 9 U.S. high school seniors reported using synthetic marijuana in the past year, which makes it the second most used illicit drug among high school seniors. Right now, we have local, state, and federal efforts are underway to ban these substances. And this is very, very problematic in our country. So, as you know, we're going to highlight prevention today, but I want you also to know that across our continuum of services, just like most other countries, is this continuum and this framework around prevention, early intervention, treatment, and what we call recovery or rehabilitation and reintegration into society. We feel like that for the first time, the recovery piece is in the President's National Drug Control Strategy. And I will talk about that after Dr. Stein talks and walks us through prevention, early intervention, and treatment. Jack?
Thank you, Mr. Mineta, and good morning. It, too, is a great honor to be here, and thank you for inviting us to your lovely country. This is the 4th visit I've had to Rome in my life, and each time I love it more and more, so it is wonderful to be here once again. If I may ask either Dr. Serpoloni or Dr. Simeoni about the time frame, I was estimating from when Mr. Mineta started that I should probably try to wrap up around 11:30. Is that acceptable? Does that work? Okay, excellent. I will try to keep my time frame adequate. Well, again, good morning. Very quickly about myself. I am a social worker by training, and although I don't have the privilege of working directly with patients and clients anymore, my background when I first started was living in New York City, where I was working primarily with people having drug-related problems and also infected with HIV or dealing with AIDS-related problems. So my initial experience as a professional was working with individuals very far down the line of disease, whether it was a medical disease such as AIDS or another type of health condition such as addiction. Over my career, I've had the opportunity to work in all aspects of the drug abuse continuum. And over these last several years, I've been focusing my efforts in prevention. And I have really begun to fully appreciate the power and the importance of intervening early and preventing a problem from starting. It's cost effective. It is the right thing to do. And I hope to share some of our experiences in the United States to help influence what I hear and understand and appreciate is one of your highest priorities with respect to prevention. I had a chance to review the National Action Plan of Italy just yesterday and am extremely impressed by how both comprehensive it is, that it addresses the scope of the problem from prevention through rehabilitation, and the fact that it is also evidence-based. It is all based in science. And to us, that is so exciting because it really very much is in parallel, very similar to the approach that we take in the United States. So we share so much in common. At the same time, after I read such a comprehensive plan, I found myself saying, what could I possibly say to you today that would be useful? The plan is so complete. There is so much there. Is there something that I really could share with you, particularly from a prevention point of view? And so I've decided to change a lot of the information that I was prepared to present to you today with what I found myself getting inspired when I read some of my colleagues' work who work in the prevention research field. And in particular, I'll be sharing some information that has been compiled by Dr. Sloboda from the United States, who is a very, very well-respected prevention researcher, who has spent some time this past year compiling all the prevention information that exists throughout the world and synthesizing it into a document to get a better understanding of what do we truly know about making a difference with respect to prevention. And I hope some of my thoughts that I share with you, which are influenced by her comments, may be useful in the implementation of your national action plan. And I also appreciate, I know the Minister of Education is here once again. You had some wonderful questions yesterday, and I hope some of these comments influence what you do in your work in schools. One of the most striking pieces of Dr. Sloboda's work dealt with the concept of what she refers to as socialization. Socialization being at the foundation of our understanding of prevention. And let me explain that a little more. By socialization, we define it as the transforming of attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors in response to cues that occur over our lifetime. Throughout our lives, especially when we are young, we are susceptible to a variety of risk and protective factors. Dr. Serpoloni had referenced already this morning. And these risk and protective factors greatly influence our health outcomes. However, what's exciting is these risk and protective factors can be influenced both positively and unfortunately negatively by what Dr. Sloboda refers to as socialization agents. And that's what I'd like to really focus on for the next 15 minutes of my talk, these so-called socialization agents. Socialization agents can be parents, teachers, peers. They could be an organization, institutions, such as our faith-based organizations, our churches, our other types of or cultural organizations, certainly the school, and as adults, our workplace shapes our behaviors. Socialization agents can also be virtual, such as mass media, the internet. So on so many levels, these socialization agents play an influence on our health outcomes. And I think one of the most profound statements that Dr. Sloboda made when I was reviewing her paper is that effective prevention is evidence-based socialization. And I'll repeat that. I think that's just a wonderful statement. Effective prevention is evidence-based socialization. So we really do have an opportunity to influence how young people and even adults behavior is shaped. And I think it also reflects a lot of the work that you'll be hearing later when we speak about the criminal justice system. Well, that brings us to perhaps a lot of the work that you all here do in your work throughout Italy. You, whether you realize it or not, myself, everyone at this panel, we are prevention specialists. We either focus directly as change agents or socialization agents, or we try to influence others who are socialization agents. Or sometimes we do both. So I'd like to spend a few moments examining these agents and some of the evidence-based interventions that have been designed by researchers that have been or could be applied here in your own country. Clearly, the first and most important socialization agent for a young person, particularly in their early years, is their parent. Their parents the family. It's a critical first agent. Without good family attachment and positive modeling behavior, a child is at great risk for substance abuse and a variety of other negative behaviors. So good, strong, family-based interventions should focus on a couple of important components. Strong parenting skills, creating a safe environment, dealing with any type of family dysfunction that may be operating clearly needs to be an important component of an intervention. Educating parents around drugs. We've been experiencing that most particularly with respect to synthetic drugs. Most parents in the US do not understand what they are. So providing this type of information is critical. And providing skills to develop and enforce family rules becomes another important component of family-based prevention interventions. Let me give you an example of two evidence-based programs that are operating that address drug prevention that are family-based. The one has been studied for many, many years, and what's wonderful about it is that it has been successful in not only reducing drug use, but a variety of other types of harms that may come to a child. It is called the Nurse-Family Partnership. And as Dr. Serpelloni had discussed earlier, by identifying a child or a family at risk as early as possible, and in this particular intervention, a nurse practitioner literally goes and works with the family on a regular basis over the course of several months, if not several years, we have seen remarkable results in not only the family's health, but the child's health many years later. Another strong program that I believe is actually being implemented here in Italy is called the Strengthening Families Program, which provides an opportunity for families and young people together to learn how to be a strong, healthy family. So those are two examples of family-based interventions. Research also tells us what does not work with respect to family-based interventions. We have learned that by ignoring the parent in the intervention is not an effective approach. We need to empower the parent. Lecturing to the parent or to the family has not been an effective approach. And focusing only on the child and not recognizing the importance of the parents and other family members has not been an effective approach. Let me move on to another important socialization agent, and that is the school, at all levels of a young person's actual career. The key for prevention, drug prevention education, and drug prevention in schools is to start as early as possible. There are three components that we've identified in school-based interventions: the culture of the school, the policies in the school, and the programs that are actually being used. And let me briefly define each of those. When we talk about the school culture, we refer to the norms, the expectations of creating an anti-drug setting. With respect to the policies that a school may have, what kind of access is there or is there not to substances, be it alcohol or other types of drugs? What kind of regulations are in place? And most importantly, how are those regulations enforced? And with respect to the various types of programs that are operating in schools, there are many types that can be used. One of the most popular is what we call life skills development, teaching young people how to refuse drugs as well as make positive choices in their life. What we have learned is the earlier these type of interventions are provided, the better, and to provide what we call booster sessions in middle or high school, where we return and revisit the same type of interventions, but provide them when the young person is a bit older. We've also learned what does not work with respect to school-based interventions. Passive participation, that is simply lecturing to the young people. Information may get communicated, But does it really result in behavior change? The research has shown it in general does not. Engaging the young person into the actual activities is probably one of the most influential and powerful types of approaches. Unstructured dialogue, just open discussion, can be useful, but is actually not shown to be very effective in making long-term changes. And the lack of drug-specific content in the program has also shown to be not effective. That is, it is very important to ensure that there is drug-specific content in information that is discussed with young people. Well, let me move on to the third of four socialization agents I wanted to talk about with you today. The third is the community. And probably one of the most influential, powerful mechanisms that we have seen in the United States is the community coming together, developing what we in our country call coalitions, but they're organizations of community members made up of various sectors, from the business community, from the religious community, from the school system, all coming together to work on the same goal of changing policies, rules, regulations in the community to ensure a safer, drug-free environment. One of the best examples we have in our country is a program we call the Drug-Free Communities Support Program. And this is actually a program that we at ONDCP actually administer. And what it consists of is providing relatively small grants to communities. And these communities take the money, which is not a lot, but they use it to become organized and to identify what their problems are, and then to begin to change the necessary policies, rules, laws to really influence and shape how drug abuse prevention is conducted. Also connected with community approaches is media strategies. We in our country have seen immense success in the reduction of tobacco use through the use of our media campaigns. So we have much to learn from that approach. Key to any media approach is to ensure that you are using a tested message, a message that motivates the desired behavior. And so what we have learned, even though it may actually seem like it works, but the research has shown us that what we call scare tactics, that is, providing a very scary message without some type of connection to a motivation to change, really does not have an impact. So visually, it may look very provocative and very interesting to us as adults, but to a young person, it may really have very little impact. Let me end this section by talking a bit about the fourth socialization agent, and that is the workplace. Of course, when most young people become of age and are able to work, it's where they and we spend most of our time. And so it is so important to create an atmosphere within the work setting to create a healthy, a place in which we can work. So we try to spend a lot of time with the workplace to develop anti-drug policies to create what we call a culture of wellness. It's also an opportunity to identify people who in fact are experiencing problems with respect to drugs and refer them to counseling, refer them to treatment, so that we are trying to intervene as early as possible. One of the most popular new approaches in the United States is what we call screening, brief intervention, and referral to treatment. And this concept is basically identifying individuals through a very brief questionnaire as to whether or not they have a particular problem with the use of substances, and if so, through a brief motivational interview to determine how much they are ready to change and to be referred to treatment. Well, let me end my section about prevention with the concept of what we call, in the research field, fidelity. And that is, how true are we to implementing the evidence-based practice based on what the research tells us? One of the greatest challenges we've faced in the United States is the limited ability to implement a practice exactly as the researchers developed it. And it's not because we don't want to, it's often because there are so many factors that may be affecting the ability to do so. It may be money. It may be how our community is structured. The school may not be organized in the way that we would like it to be. However, trying to keep an intervention as focused on how the researchers developed it really becomes one of our greatest and most important challenges. Referring back to Dr. Sloboda, whose work influenced my comments to you today, she made a very interesting analogy. She said that effective prevention is like brain surgery. It needs to be evidence-based, it needs to be target-specific, and it needs to be approach-driven. And if it is not delivered as designed, the results, of course, can be poor, and sometimes, and we have seen this, the results can actually be damaging. And so we obviously need to think very strongly about which particular prevention interventions are we selecting for our communities, and can we implement them with as much fidelity as possible. And one of the keys to do so is to ensure that we have quality change agents, quality socialization agents. And I think that's where I will end with the importance of ensuring that we have good individuals such as yourselves and the people that you work with well-trained and well-schooled in understanding what the research tells us. With that, I think I'm going to turn the microphone back over to Mr. Mineta, who will be having some final comments about the concept of recovery.
Thank you, Jack. One of the things we wanted to do is I'm sorry, I'm going to skip through. So Jack just covered all of this. And talk just briefly about recovery and, again, rehabilitation and reintegration. One of the areas that we are very excited about is the focus on in the federal government on policy around recovery. And this is trying to reduce our use of high-cost services, increase treatment access, and save money while we expand access. Much of these recovery support services are sometimes they're prior, they're during treatment, and for sure after. They could be with peer support. A lot of it's set up through peer networks, and it's helping not only the individual but the entire family achieve stable and long-term recovery. One of the things that I think that comes to mind whenever I go to a graduation for treatment programs, and I've conducted many of them and gone to many, is the group that oftentimes is the most maybe cynical and they're kind of waiting to see what happens are the family members. And particularly the teenagers. They've seen addiction in their family maybe for so long that they're very cautious about the hope of someone being in recovery. This recovery movement is trying to help the families understand what that trajectory is going to look like, what that path to recovery is going to be. So it's not just the individual, it's the whole family. And it's creating a movement of folks. We have an estimated 23 million Americans who are in recovery. It's helping that community maintain long-term recovery. Lastly, we'd like to, as we prepare for Dr. Sabet and Judge Rancourt, I want to just focus just a minute on how important criminal justice reform is to President Obama, Vice President Biden, and our office. Is that we understand that there is a relationship to the health condition of addiction and dependency with criminality. That unlike other health conditions, there is this link. And again, Dr. Sabet will go into this more. The administration understands that and understands that on the criminal justice side, there needs to be reforms, and we are implementing those reforms to make sure that this particular health condition is, again, that balance of public health and the public safety approach. And that we need to work with both our local governments as well as our state governments and on the federal policy level as well. So there are many innovative strategies. We're going to talk, our delegation will talk specifically about several that are at work right now and walk through the actual mechanisms of these happening. And I would hope if you have a chance to go online, I don't know if there's NADCP actually has this, but online is to see if there's any video or you could see a drug court judge at work. It is one of the most impressive pieces of work I think that you will see. And you will understand, and actually when you hear the judge, you'll understand it even better. With that, on behalf of President Obama, Vice President Biden, who wrote the authorizing language for our office as a senator, my boss, Director Kurlikowski, we want to thank you for all of your efforts on drug policy. We want to thank the Department of Anti-Drug Policies for this wonderful invite to be here with you today and to continue our exchange of best practice, research, and effective drug policy. And I can't express how grateful we are to Professor Serpelloni, to Dr. Simeone, and to the entire staff of the department for this opportunity. And again, on behalf of your friends across the Atlantic, and my family in particular, that in America, just so you know, if you've heard this before yesterday, my apologies, but in America, we're considered Italian until we walk into the door, and then people realize, you don't look Italian to me. But from this sort of long-lost cousin of our Italian countrymen, I want to say thank you from my family as well. And we look forward to hosting you all at another time. But thank you all very, very much. And thank you for your work in the field. We look forward to continued exchanges in the future. Thank you all very much.
Grazie, dottor Mineta. Credo che noi possiamo aprire già una prima discussione, un giro di domande o di vari interventi che ci possono essere, in maniera che poi passiamo a quello che può essere appunto l'altro argomento relativo al discorso del carcere. Però prima di passare al carcere, magari se ci sono degli interventi, delle domande del pubblico, sono ben accette. C'è qualcuno che vuole rompere il ghiaccio? Prego. Si presenta. Vi ricordo che siamo online, quindi siamo visti su internet in tutta Italia. Prego.
May I speak in Italian or for the sake? Okay. Enrico Tezza from the International Training Center of the International Labour Organization in Turin. Ho apprezzato molto una domanda per Jack. Ho apprezzato molto l'intervento sulla socializzazione, sugli agenti socializzanti, che tra l'altro sono una legacy, European legacy, I would say, e quindi ho apprezzato molto queste indicazioni. Ci sono tuttavia interessanti studi del NAIDA sull'effetto di quello che lei ha indicato come perceived risk, cioè la percezione del rischio che ha una comunità rispetto per esempio all'uso e al consumo delle droghe. Ci sono studi anche molto interessanti sulla velocità di diffusione della droga negli Stati Uniti, dove viene verificato che per esempio che nei villaggi la droga ha una velocità di diffusione inferiore a quella nelle grandi città come New York City e altro. Questo è dovuto all'effetto di percezione, quindi alla socializzazione, direi alla memoria collettiva di una comunità rispetto al consumo e ai danni delle droghe. Per esempio, quando noi vediamo un incidente, forse con delle morti rallentiamo, ma forse dopo 2 giorni, 3 giorni continuiamo a mantenere la stessa velocità. Ecco, negli studi del NIDA questi studi vengono identificati nella variabile years e sono, dal punto di vista matematico, contabilizzati come il numero del heavy users, delle persone che consumano e sono prossimi anche al rischio di morte, per il numero di anni di consumo. Ecco, io volevo sapere se ci sono ulteriori sviluppi da parte vostra, a livello del NIDA o a livello degli Stati Uniti, su questi studi e come questi vengono interpretati nelle politiche di prevenzione. Grazie.
Well, thank you for the question and the comment. I'm not aware of further research in that arena. However, we work very closely with our colleagues at NIDA, and I've already made a note to more than happy to pursue that. But clearly, the connection between perception of risk or perception of harm, as we often report it, and resulting drug use is so obvious. We've seen that on our national data. We see it on our local data. It is something that is so important. And one of the messages I did not get across this morning was that one of our founding principles is that prevention needs to happen locally. And we encourage every community that we work with to understand and fully appreciate what the nature of the drug problems are for them, and to use that to really build their response. We've created what's called a strategic prevention framework, which some of you may have heard about that concept. And if you haven't, we're happy to share it with you. But it is a very basic but useful building block process where we encourage communities to look at data that is available around perception, about drug use trends, and based on that, to make some decisions as to what policies and what practices should be put into place. But I'll be happy to follow up with you on the specific research that you had referenced, but clearly the connection between perception and use is very, very profound and shapes what we've seen in nationwide data over these last 20 or 30 years in the United States. Thank you.
Se posso dare un contributo, poi ti passo la parola. Per quello che riguarda le nostre conoscenze, gli studi che abbiamo fatto anche in Italia, esiste sicuramente una variabile percezione del rischio, che è una variabile individuale, e in realtà la percezione del rischio in termini collettivi poi si trasforma e si preferisce parlare di disapprovazione sociale, che è anche un altro tipo di studio che è stato fatto negli Stati Uniti estremamente interessante, che dimostra effettivamente che in certe persone, non in tutte, in certe persone, soprattutto quelli che hanno un atteggiamento particolare, il cosiddetto temperamento di profilo novelty seeking, il calo della percezione del rischio è molto pericoloso perché associato ad una attitudine al rischio può portare all'espressione di un comportamento di assunzione. Questi sono studi della psicologia comportamentale che conosciamo da parecchi anni e che stanno alla base poi della motivazione al comportamento. E il fatto di andare a tentare di sviluppare una percezione del rischio, noi pensiamo che debba, nella popolazione giovanile, debba sempre andare di pari passo con la lettura del temperamento di queste persone, perché far percepire un grosso rischio ad una persona che cerca il rischio può essere incentivante l'uso di sostanze. Questo è quello che noi abbiamo visto. Mentre una variabile sociale, che è la disapprovazione sociale, cioè quanto la società nel contesto e l'ambiente in cui vive quella persona manifesta il fatto che l'uso di sostanze non è accettato, anzi addirittura sanzionato, che è una condizione che può minare la tua salute, che ci sono regole e leggi che creano dei deterrenti. Questo mantenuto nel tempo si è dimostrato, gli studi sono americani, sono studi che ho visto avete utilizzato anche voi nelle diapositive, almeno uno di questi. È molto importante, molto interessante, perché più la società esprime, più l'ambiente esprime questo concetto, e negli anni più l'uso di marijuana, per esempio, cala. Il che vuol dire che è estremamente importante che l'esplicitazione di questa necessità di non consumare, anche attraverso appunto regole sociali, le leggi e tutta una serie di pubblicità anche che possono essere mantenute chiaramente nel tempo, può condizionare nell'arco di 20-30 anni sicuramente l'andamento del consumo di marijuana. Io quello che mi permetto di dire è anche quello di dire che anche noi teniamo chiaramente sotto controllo, perché ci piace tenerci aggiornati tutti gli studi del NAIDA, eccetera. Dobbiamo sempre pensare che c'è una variabile nel consumo che è quella, e che non è controllabile purtroppo da noi, che è quella dell'offerta. Quando si pensa che nei piccoli villaggi lo spread è più lento rispetto alle metropoli, è fondamentalmente dovuto anche al fatto che nei piccoli villaggi o nelle piccole comunità l'offerta è meno pesante, meno pressante, meno presente, no? Perché le organizzazioni criminali tendono a concentrare l'offerta nei posti dove c'è più domanda. Nulla è più vero poi rispetto ad una regola del marketing che, come in questo caso, cioè in chi usa o consuma droghe, che è proprio l'offerta che stimola la domanda. Ed per le droghe è essenziale questo, dove tu porti o un'organizzazione criminale porta le sostanze su un territorio prima vergine, sicuramente la domanda va alle stelle. Quindi è un insieme di variabili, ecco, che va considerato. L'ultima raccomandazione che mi sento di fare però è quella: attenzione, perché la popolazione giovanile non è tutta uguale, ci sono dei fattori di rischio, dei fattori di protezione che sono diversificati. I profili temperamentali, secondo le teorie di Cloninger, quindi i novelty seeking piuttosto che gli harm avoidance, hanno dei profili di rischio diversi. Per cui anche quando noi facciamo delle operazioni di prevenzione, degli interventi di prevenzione, dobbiamo tenere conto che certe persone saranno particolarmente recettive a queste cose qua, ma una piccola parte, che è stimata intorno al 15% della popolazione giovanile, sono abbastanza resistenti ai messaggi di prevenzione. E quindi probabilmente ci vuole un intervento più specifico. Prego, c'era una domanda da parte.
Mi chiamo Boschini, lavoro in una comunità terapeutica per tossicodipendenti. Un fenomeno che stiamo vedendo negli ultimi anni in crescita, in netta crescita, è il problema dei figli di tossicodipendenti che entrano per un trattamento a loro volta per tossicodipendenza. La domanda era: esistono secondo voi dei programmi preventivi specifici per giovani figli di un genitore o entrambi i genitori tossicodipendenti?
Chi la rivolge la domanda?
Dottor Stein, che ha parlato della prevenzione.
Jack Stein, ok.
Sure, and Dave probably has some experience in that arena as well. Yes, that's a wonderful question. A parent who is using drugs is a huge risk factor for a young person to eventually have a drug problem themselves. And so identifying such an individual, and Dr. Serpelloni had identified the importance of really identifying high-risk individuals. That's a classic example of where an intervention needs to be focused. There are a number of evidence-based programs that focus in on that arena, and the one that I had mentioned earlier, the nurse practitioner program, the nurse family program, for example, is something that occurs very early on, and that is designed to be actually targeting families that, in fact, the mother or the father was or is a drug user, and to really intervene very, very early on in the life of that family. So that's one of a number of examples, and there are others when the young person is a bit older. But perhaps Mr. Mineta has had some experience when he was an actual practitioner that could comment.
Thank you, Jack. One of the programs, it's interesting because the Strengthening Family programs, we'd implemented the Strengthening Family program, SFP, in the San Francisco Bay Area, and we had found that actually within that population, many of the parents actually had their own either addictions or were in recovery, and that connection with their adolescent was very important because this may have been the first time that they were talking about their own issues and dealing with it as a family. So there are many efforts both for us either on the evidence-based side, like Strengthening Families, or as Jack said, on the Visiting Nurse program. The other thing is we have associations for children of alcoholics in NACOA, or we have certain voluntary groups that are also bringing the spotlight. This last week was the National Week of Children of Alcoholics Week, bringing attention to the issue for children of addicted parents and bringing that to light. So there are many efforts for us in this area, and because of the genetics and environmental risks of growing up in these families, that we want to make sure that there are evidence-based programs and environmental or public education campaigns that are going on to make policymakers and local officials aware of that, school-based officials aware of that issue as well. Thank you.
Ci sono altre domande? Prego. Sì, prego.
Io volevo invitare tutti coloro che volessero approfondire l'approccio del governo americano di visitare il loro sito, il sito dell'ONDCP, in quanto è fatto assolutamente bene. Ogni giorno viene aggiornato e ogni giorno vengono inseriti i loro programmi specifici e le loro metodologie specifiche. Vedrete che le nostre basi sono assolutamente simili. Grazie.
Perfetto, quello che potremmo anche aggiungere su questa cosa qua dei figli è che io vi invito anche a ragionare, no? L'amico Boschini, volevo presentare ai colleghi americani, è il medico responsabile di un centro medico della più importante comunità in Italia, che è San Patrignano, che voi sicuramente avete conosciuto o avete sentito. Quello che volevo aggiungere era che i figli hanno diverse componenti, figli di tossicodipendenti, come rischio aggiuntivo. La prima è quella genetica, nel senso che sappiamo che c'è un profilo genetico che può predisporre, non predeterminare, predisporre, quindi in termini probabilistici, a un profilo di rischio aumentato. Gli studi dimostrano che sono 4-5 volte il rischio aumentato rispetto ai non figli tossicodipendenti, no, per il profilo genetico. Ma successivamente c'è anche un profilo comportamentale familiare, nel senso che il fatto che famiglie o genitori utilizzino sostanze, al di là del profilo genetico trasmissibile, è comunque un rischio aggiuntivo. E poi bisogna pensare che c'è anche il rischio ambientale. Queste famiglie spesso lavorano o comunque abitano o vivono all'interno di ambienti ad alto rischio. Quindi l'insieme di queste cose può creare sicuramente un rischio aggiuntivo. Quindi in termini preventivi questa è una prevenzione selettiva che va fatta, e va fatta con un supporto alle famiglie e anche agli insegnanti che avranno poi in cura queste persone, perché in supporto, in contatto con queste persone. Dobbiamo avere un po' più di attenzione. Il rischio che bisogna assolutamente evitare è che si metta un label, un'etichetta su questi bambini, che poi diventa invece che supportiva discriminante. Quindi la raccomandazione che noi facciamo, sì, prestiamo più attenzione, ma attenzione che poi non diventi il fatto che il figlio del tossicodipendente o l'ex tossicodipendente gli creiamo un destino segnato e che si attiva una discriminazione, quindi c'è un bilanciamento importante da fare, credo che tu possa concordare su queste cose, insomma. Ci sono...
Sì. Circa quanto ha detto il professor Serpelloni, volevo dire proprio questo. La nostra esperienza riguardo ai figli tossicodipendenti è molto articolata. Abbiamo avuto moltissimi casi in cui i figli hanno accompagnato al nostro centro d'accoglienza il padre per stimolarlo e spingerlo a entrare in comunità. Questo quindi dimostra proprio quanto diceva il professor Perloni, che non c'è tanto un rapporto diretto, lineare, conseguenziale e stringente che può portare a quella conseguenza, quanto piuttosto una serie di concause che soprattutto vedono la situazione sociale e ambientale in cui vivono. È chiaro che proprio l'altro ieri ho fatto un colloquio in un carcere siciliano in cui ho parlato con un ragazzo tossicodipendente e aveva il padre, era morto proprio per overdose ed era spacciatore. 4 fratelli erano tutti e 4 in carcere per spaccio. È chiaro che tutto questo lo condiziona in maniera talmente pesante che quasi inevitabilmente, soprattutto in un contesto in cui non c'è nessuna possibilità di trovare un lavoro, allora ecco che la spinta sociale diventa cogente. Grazie.
Grazie. Altri interventi? Altre domande? Prego, dottor Canuzzi del Ministero della Salute.
Buongiorno. Buongiorno a tutta la delegazione americana, ringrazio il Dipartimento per le politiche antidroga. Volevo porre una domanda al dottor Stein riguardo la prevenzione delle patologie correlate e nello specifico riguardo alle patologie droga correlate e infettive, l'HIV, l'HCV e l'HBV. Ecco, se ci sono dei programmi a livello locale o a livello federale negli Stati Uniti e che tipologia di programmi ci sono. In aggiunta, dato che ieri lei aveva fatto menzione del Vivitrol, cioè praticamente del naltrexone depot, volevo sapere se l'esperienza con questo tipo di farmaco com'è andata, perché in Italia c'è stata una sperimentazione negli anni 90 ma non è andata del tutto diciamo così a regime, per cui i farmaci utilizzati attualmente sono sostanzialmente 3, sono il metatone cloridrato, abbiamo la buprenorfina come sostitutivi ovviamente, e abbiamo anche il subuxone che però è naloxone con il naltrexone. Ecco, appunto, volevo capire se la terapia con il naltrexone depot veniva fatta a livello ambulatoriale oppure c'era una fase di preospedalizzazione. Grazie.
Thank you for both those questions. Very quickly, our Food and Drug Administration has recently approved the use of Vivitrol, depot naltrexone, for the treatment of opiate addiction. It needs to be prescribed by a physician. It can be done in an outpatient type of setting. The research data leading up to it was obviously strong enough that it was felt able to be approved by our Food and Drug Administration. We're now moving into the very exciting phase of seeing it used and trained, making sure that practitioners, healthcare providers, physicians in particular, of course, are well schooled and well trained in the proper administration and management of it. One of the actually very exciting components of it, which still needs to be further investigated, is the use of Vivitrol with a criminal justice population. Obviously, 1 injection per month gives a wonderful opportunity to minimize any concerns around compliance, and hopefully could be a potential opportunity to enhance compliance with treatment. So that is some of the things that we're looking forward to and hoping to see some more research, which our colleagues at National Institute on Drug Abuse will be looking at. To your first question, there's been many, many years on the effective HIV prevention techniques with drug-using populations. If I understand your question correctly, it is the combination of HIV prevention and drug prevention. We in the United States, and I suspect we share that with you in Italy, really view the two working very, very closely together. We have a very strong, unfortunate connection between HIV infection and in particularly injection drug use, but drug use in general. And the HIV testing programs have been actually very, very important to help identify whether an individual is in fact infected with HIV. And talking with Dr. Serpelloni yesterday, I understand that the access to HIV testing is very, very widespread here in Italy, which gives an individual an opportunity to obviously know their status. In addition, there have been a number of various types of prevention educational programs targeting people with drug-related problems, which have been in existence for about 20 years in the United States, and actually professionally that's where I actually began. One of the most powerful ones was actually the use of peer outreach workers, individuals formerly who had drug-related problems, being able to talk with individuals who were at risk, increasing their level of awareness, helping them understand how to reduce their risk. Embedding HIV prevention techniques into drug treatment programs in the United States has been a very commonplace, and I suspect that is the same case in Italy. And we do view view drug treatment as HIV prevention.
Grazie. Altre? Prego. Ministero dell'Istruzione. Dottoressa Corradini.
Io vi ringrazio sempre per gli interventi estremamente interessanti e che sollecitano una serie di domande. Io volevo chiedere al dottor Stein, che ha fatto questo intervento, diciamo, focalizzato sui diversi agenti di socializzazione, se avevate studiato, diciamo, che tipo di influenza relativa possono avere rispetto alle persone a cui è rivolto, diciamo, il programma di prevenzione, rispetto al livello di istruzione magari familiare, all'età, al genere maschile o femminile, allo stato e al contesto sociale, quindi in che modo, diciamo, poi possono cambiare i programmi di prevenzione. Grazie.
If I understand your question correctly, it is how do the various programs that focus on socialization, change agents, how might they vary depending on different aspects of perhaps gender or culture? Is that correct? Okay. That yes, many of these studies, and in fact most of the ones that we promote and we publish on behalf of the federal government and identify as model programs, we try to encourage those that have the most rigorous type of testing. And by rigorous, I mean those that are tested with a variety of different types of variations of populations it serves. It's very frustrating in the United States when we have so many different types of communities, different types of geographies, different types of ethnic and racial groups, to say a particular intervention has been effective, but only because it was tested with a Caucasian audience. And so we're very interested in making sure that an intervention that is promoted actually has been shown to work with a variety of different types of audiences, male, female, young, old, different types of races. So majority of the ones that would be listed, and I think yesterday I shared with you a website called NREP, which is the National Registry of Effective Practices and Programs, which is a list of about 100 various prevention interventions. I'd say a majority of those interventions have been very extensively tested with in a variety of different types of settings with different populations to say that they can be applied throughout our country. That being said, there is, in our country at least, there is always a community or a population that has its unique needs. And that's where the research challenge continues to come up. And our colleagues at the National Institute on Drug Abuse are always asking its researchers to try testing it with various other types of populations and factors, because that influences what a program would look like. And the last thing I would say is, many of our programs that I talked about today, the question is, how applicable are they to communities in Italy. And in terms of an opportunity for research collaboration, that might be some very exciting opportunities. What works in the United States, does it work in an Italian community, in an Italian city with different populations? And if it does, wonderful. If it doesn't, how might we adapt it to do so? So instead of starting from the beginning, take what we know works in some populations and try to apply it. So we welcome that type of collaboration and discussion.
Hey, Jack, if I could just add on as well. You know, one of the things on the NREP list, and I would suggest to look at this NREP list, is that some programs are general they work across ethnic groups, specific for a certain age group, better for a certain age group. Some are specific. Some were normed for Native Alaskans or Native Americans. Some are girl programs. They're just for girls, adolescent girls. And, you know, from the program side or being in the community side, looking at that list and seeing which one actually could work for our community, and we're going to test it out, has been very helpful. So again, I think on that list, and that is a Health and Human Services list. There's a Department of Education list. There's a Department of Justice list that has effective programs on those lists, evidence-based, promising practices, and you know, with some type of evaluation that was connected to it. Thanks.
Prego. Altre cose? Prego.
Gennaro Pastore, Regione Campania. Volevo sapere, la domanda la rivolgo al dottor Minetta, se anche negli Stati Uniti, per quanto riguarda la diagnosi di tossicodipendenza, che poi permette un approccio particolare, un accesso alle misure di legge, le linee di indirizzo governative con quelle che sono evidenze scientifiche hanno prodotto una modalità omogenea per fare diagnosi di tossicodipendenza.
I'm not sure. Would you mind actually, I'm not sure if I understand the question correctly. I want to make sure that I get this correctly. Would you mind repeating that for me again, please?
In Italia negli ultimi tempi, negli ultimi anni, anche con gli indirizzi del Dipartimento, con quello che noi nella nostra regione stiamo facendo, c'è un lavoro per condividere una modalità omogenea su tutto il territorio affinché si formuli la diagnosi tossicodipendenza. La formulazione di questa diagnosi diventa un requisito indispensabile per poi attivare tutte le procedure di misure alternative. E il lavoro che si fa è quello di recepire gli indirizzi nazionali, ma coniugarli anche con le evidenze scientifiche. Volevo sapere se anche negli Stati Uniti si sta facendo questo tipo di integrazione.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. Yes, we do. We are currently, most of the providers use the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the DSM, which is coming out. We are expecting DSM-5, the 5th edition, to come out actually, I think it's later on this year. And that's the diagnostic manual that actually most providers actually will use to establish dependency and addiction for services or a medical necessity. In addition, we have levels that are issued from the American Society of Addiction Medicine, ASAM, placement criteria that we use as well for different levels of treatment, either outpatient, intensive outpatient, or residential programs as well. So we do have centralized or standardized methods of diagnosis as well.
And if I could add to that, even backing up even further to one of the things that Dr. Serpelloni had referenced is the importance of identifying people early as possible with respect to screening instruments. These last number of years, we've really been encouraging the use of the one of the tools used by the World Health Organization called the ASSIST, which is a relatively brief screening instrument, a verbal screening instrument that could help in a standardized way ensure that healthcare providers are identifying individuals and determine their level of particular concern, or at least an alert that in fact there may be a substance use problem operating. So I think on all different levels, from screening to a diagnosis to actually a patient placement, we've really begun to institute a lot more standardized approaches.
Grazie. Io aggiungo allo stimolo del collega queste due osservazioni molto brevi. La prima è sicuramente che la diagnosi precoce, cioè l'early detection, può avere almeno 3 livelli di applicazione. Come dicevamo prima, per chiarezza, per una questione metodologica, l'early detection di che cosa? Di quelli che possono essere dei comportamenti a rischio o comunque delle condizioni di rischio che erano quelle che si possono vedere già in giovanissima età prima che queste persone arrivino all'uso di sostanze. Il secondo livello è quello di cogliere precocemente l'uso occasionale di sostanze, l'uso sperimentale, quindi in una fase dove non c'è ancora la dipendenza. E il terzo livello è quello di cogliere precocemente lo stato di tossicodipendenza, perché ricordo a tutti che noi arriviamo a vedere i pazienti tossicodipendenti dopo almeno 6, 8, a volte 9 anni che questi hanno già un uso stabilizzato di sostanze. Quindi su questi 3 livelli si possono creare dei programmi specifici di intervento, chiaramente molto differenziati perché hanno target differenti e metodologie differenti. Detto questo, il fatto della standardizzazione della diagnosi che tu sollevavi, no, ha 2 aspetti difficili. Il primo è che non riusciamo a metterci d'accordo spesso neppure all'interno dei medici di come fare diagnosi di tossicodipendente all'interno delle carceri. Ne parleremo dopo con il giudice, no? E lì c'è una nostra scheda, un nostro tentativo che è stato mandato nelle linee di indirizzo in maniera da poter almeno mettersi d'accordo che i medici parlino lo stesso linguaggio. Molti medici non usano il DSM, ma molti non lo usano, molti usano l'ICD, molti ne usano tutti e due, qualcuno non usa niente, qualcuno usa solo l'anamnesi, cioè è tutto un po' da definire. Il fatto che abbiamo messo a punto delle linee di indirizzo stava per un tentativo di andare a creare un benchmark di riferimento su questa cosa qua. Poi l'altro problema, sempre relativamente alle diagnosi, è che quando noi usiamo la parola tossicodipendente, ammesso che la usiamo con una diagnosi clinica precisa che può fare riferimento per esempio al DSM-4, non è detto che quella parola venga intesa esattamente con il significato esatto tecnico-scientifico che ha dal magistrato. Quindi è necessario, e questa è la seconda proposta, ed è per questo che poi abbiamo sentito anche il giudice Rancourt, che è importante che le 2 compagini, quella sanitaria e quella della giustizia, abbiano la stessa semantica. E non è scontato che sia così, perché nella maggior parte dei casi si parla e si utilizzano criteri che sono diversi. Quindi probabilmente i medici dovranno imparare un po' di legge, per usare un termine semplificato anche nella traduzione per le nostre bravissime interpreti, e i giudici dovranno imparare probabilmente un po' di medicina. Il giudice è molto preparato qui presente nelle neuroscienze, mi ha sorpreso più volte, anche ieri a cena, insomma si discuteva in questo senso, ma questo mi ha dato l'impressione e la bella sensazione che l'evidence base che producono le ricerche scientifiche e gli istituti scientifici americani riescono poi a filtrare e a creare formazione in aree di discipline che non sono mediche, ma sono la giustizia, ma che utilizza i criteri medici per dare poi delle soluzioni importanti e che hanno un'importanza notevole sul percorso di recupero di queste persone. Io mentre si parlava ho disegnato una diapositiva che poi metterò nelle mie diapositive standard, che è proprio questa, ma ne parleremo meglio dopo, questa unione, questa cooperazione che ci deve essere fra chi si occupa di sanità e chi si occupa di giustizia per quanto riguarda le tossicodipendenze. Io credo che da medico, no, il fatto che abbiamo dei magistrati, e nel nostro caso sarebbero i magistrati di sorveglianza, che ci danno una mano nel creare percorsi più lineari, più stabili, aumentando quindi, usando un termine medico, la compliance del paziente, no? Con dei buoni percorsi di supporto esterno e di cura e di riabilitazione riusciamo ad avere dei percorsi di recovery, cioè di recupero della persona maggiori. I dati che hanno portato loro e che vedremo dopo nella relazione sono veramente entusiasmanti. Ok, c'era un altro intervento, prego.
Emanuela Falconi, medico di un servizio per le dipendenze. Nell'ambito del recupero e della riabilitazione, il dottor Mineta ha accennato a una riduzione dei servizi ad alto costo. Volevo sapere quali sono questi servizi, se il motivo era più economico anche dovuto a risultati ottenuti. Grazie.
Thank you for the question. We hope that it's actually both. We're hoping that it's both. We are, on a local and state and federal level, all three levels of government are having budgetary difficulties in the United States. So we are, more so right now, we are looking for cost efficiencies and cost savings across the system. We feel that the recovery services and recovery supports are low-cost ways of improving our long-term recovery rates and supporting those who are in recovery. So that's one. Additionally, the more information we get about the efficacy of recovery support and recovery support programs, we think also it's showing that in addition to saving the dollars, that we can actually show that people are able to maintain longer-term recovery as well. This is, for those people who are in the treatment system, who go through formal treatment, this helps them. We feel that some people in recovery never went through went through formal treatment at all, and it helps them as well. So this is for both people in formal recovery programs or treatment programs, as well as those who have maybe not entered or been in other 12-step groups, NA, AA groups as well.
Ok, grazie. Prego, l'ultima domanda, poi passiamo perché siamo già un po' in ritardo. Prego. Riesci a premere?
Matteo Simone, sono psicologo in aeronautica militare, ma mi occupo anche di psicologia dello sport e dell'attività fisica. Vorrei fare una domanda al dottor Stein oppure al dottor Mineta. Volevo chiedere, allora, la mia domanda è se ci sono programmi da una parte volti ad invogliare la gente, dai bambini agli adulti, agli anziani, a fare attività fisica, e dall'altro lato programmi tesi a prevenire il fenomeno doping, quindi coinvolgendo e formando agenti di cambiamento e socializzazione quali allenatori, professori di educazione fisica, personal trainer, dirigenti sportivi. Grazie.
Yes, thank you for that question. That was and continues to be a problem in the United States, and as a result, about 10, 15 years ago, two specific programs that I'm aware of that are probably the most well-known, developed by Dr. Lynn Goldberg in the northwest part of our country, one targeting young male athletes and one targeting young female athletes around the use of, in these cases, steroids or other types of performance-enhancing drugs. One program is called the Atlas program. The other is called Athena, A-T-H-E-N-A. And again, the concept is it's embedded in the schools, working with the coaches, providing education with a big focus on motivating the young people to realize that they can perform just as well as without the use of any type of performance enhancement, and recognize that, in fact, that type of enhancement, in essence, is actually unfair. It's an unfair practice. And we've seen some really remarkable, very positive results. And if you're interested specifically in learning about those two programs, I'd be happy to make sure that you are linked directly with either Dr. Goldberg's work or to a website that would provide more information about those two very, very successful programs.
Grazie. Kevin?
I just wanted to make one quick comment, and then I think we're going to get into our presentations about the criminal justice system. We're talking a lot about individual programs for prevention and also for treatment and intervention, which is obviously very important. But I think that we shouldn't forget that we need to, when we think about especially drug prevention, we shouldn't get too focused on individualized programs. And the reason is because obviously people live in a whole life, right? They live, their livelihood is more complete than just attending 1 hour a day programs. Because after they leave that 1 hour program, they're going into the community. And they're living amongst other people who may increase their risk factor for using. They're living amongst the community that also may increase their risk factor, let's say for problem drinking, if there are a lot of advertisements or there are a lot of alcohol, liquor outlet places where you could buy alcohol or tobacco that are very much in your face. So that also has to be part of prevention. And so it's really what I would call a community-based response, part of which are implementing evidence-based programs that we had talked about earlier, and that's key. You have to do that. Programs in schools, in the workplace, in other environments. But another part of that are the community norms, the laws and regulations and customs that govern a whole society and community. Those things need to be, I would say, targeted as well, just as important as these individualized programs. We have to remember, prevention is more than just a few programs that have been analyzed a couple of times. Prevention is an entire response that the community, that parents, that religious institutions, we haven't talked about religion at all, that businesses have a responsibility in a community to help prevent drugs, because we all will pay in taxes and in other economic means if addiction grows. So businesses, parents, youth, it all has to be united together. Right? I just wanted to make that final point about prevention.
Grazie, mi sembra una sottolineatura estremamente importante. La prevenzione indicata selettiva va sempre messa in un contesto tipo ambientale che deve essere coerente con i messaggi che noi vogliamo portare sul singolo, sulla famiglia. No? E queste coerenze si creano anche con le leggi, i regolamenti, la cultura e l'esplicitazione di una non accettazione o comunque di una non tolleranza nei confronti dell'uso di sostanze. Va bene, io ringrazio tutti per questa prima tornata, per questo primo argomento che è stato anche approfondito, direi molto bene, questo a dimostrazione che c'è un interesse da parte chiaramente dell'uditorio per la parte di prevenzione, e passerei subito alla seconda relazione del giudice Rancourt, che è una relazione estremamente importante cambiando settore. Stiamo parlando quindi di un settore dove affrontiamo già un problema esistente di tossicodipendenza e di un tossicodipendente che ha commesso dei crimini e che in qualche modo, dei reati che in qualche modo dovrebbe essere avviato ad un percorso di recupero attraverso delle pene alternative. Prego, giudice. Grazie.
Thank you. If any of you want to stand and stretch, please feel free to do so at this time. You've been sitting for some period of time. Feel free to do it. Again, good morning. My name is Robert Rancourt. I am a judge in the state of Minnesota, and I thank you for inviting me to this conference. We have been so well received in your country. I can't thank you enough. I've had the opportunity in the last few days to get to know Dr. Serpelloni and also Director Simeone, and I would indicate to you that Italy is well served by their leadership and energy. I also want to thank you. When I heard I'd be speaking today to practitioners, that's the people I really enjoy talking with, because you are on the front lines every day dealing with substance abuse, mental health issues, and behavioral problems of addicts. So I really commend you for the work you do every day, and I really do appreciate and like to hear what you have to say as far as what you believe works in your communities. You know, as judges, we not only sentence people, but we're also very interested in prevention, because we don't want to see these people in our courts. It's too late then. It's too late. Now, my background, I was a criminal defense lawyer from 1976 to 2002. So my job was to try to keep people out of jail. Now as a judge, of course, my job sometimes is to put people in jail. And what we have to do, we have to change the perception of addiction, community-wide. For example, when I look out at this audience, and I was thinking today, just imagine on this side, and this is what happens in my courts every day, on this side of the aisle, we have a 16-year-old who was killed in a car crash. The mother and father are here with all the relatives. And pretty much about the same numbers I see here today. On this side, I see a 21-year-old, college graduate, no prior criminal history, was driving a motor vehicle at 110 miles an hour under the influence of alcohol and has killed this 16-year-old. Your perception of substance abuse may be totally different than yours. And that's how we have to change the perception of substances. It's very personal, because it has an impact on each and every one of our lives. When I was first appointed to the bench as a judge, our Chief Justice of our state Supreme Court requested that I get involved in forming a task force to address the issues of alcohol and drugs on our courts. As a result of that, I've attended numerous trainings relating to the disease of addiction and co-occurring disorders, presented to numerous organizations on the impact of alcohol and drugs on the courts, and worked on establishing a juvenile substance abuse court in my county. I became involved with the National Association of Drug Court Professionals as a director, and now serve as chairman of the board of directors of that association. That association is a nonprofit national corporation founded in 1994 by pioneers from the first 12 drug courts in our nation. Drug courts were started in 1989 in Dade County, Florida. This extraordinary group of innovative judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and clinical professionals created a common sense approach to improving the judicial system by using a combination of judicial monitoring and effective treatment to compel drug users using offenders to change their lives. From these visionaries came the drug court model and ultimately the broader problem-solving court principles taught in our law schools and utilized in everyday court practice throughout numerous municipal, state, and federal court systems nationwide. Today, we have about 2,600 drug courts in the United States and over 1,200 problem-solving courts. But problems were identified that created a need for drug courts and an organization such as NADCP. And why, as a judge, did I believe this model works? Because quite frankly, when I first saw the model, I was somewhat hesitant. You have to understand, when I was a trial attorney, we would advocate on behalf of our clients, but the normal process was our client would see a judge, they'd have somewhat of an assessment, they'd either be sent to prison or jail, and the next time I would see them, if they were just sent to jail and put on community supervision or probation, was when they violated. That's the next time I saw them. And sometimes they would receive a notice of violation, for example, in a probation violation that occurred 3 or 4 months earlier. So obviously they haven't seen a judge now for 4 months since the fact that they either used or violated the conditions of probation. That is too late to address the need and the impact of what they did. So we started looking at drug courts as a possibility of addressing issues of public safety better ways to include recovery, and criminal justice. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is quoted as saying, "Life's most urgent question is what are you doing for others?" I try to keep this quote in mind when individuals appear before me in light of the fact in the United States, the judiciary refers more people to treatment than any other entity. Now, what is a drug court? A drug court is a special docket or calendar within the court system that is designed to treat addicted individuals and give them the tools they need to change their lives. The drug court judge serves as a leader of an interdisciplinary team of professionals, which often includes a court coordinator, prosecuting attorneys, defense attorneys, treatment providers, case managers, probation officers, and representatives from law enforcement. Eligible participants, and I'll get into that in a moment, for the programs are drug and/or alcohol dependent and commonly charged with drug-related offenses such as possession of a controlled substance or other offenses which are determined to have been caused or influenced by their addiction, such as theft or forgery. Most drug court programs are scheduled to be 12 to 18 months in duration, although some participants may need substantially more time to satisfy the criteria for program completion. To graduate, participants must demonstrate continuous abstinence from drugs and alcohol for a substantial period of time, often 6 months or longer, satisfy treatment and supervision conditions, pay applicable fines or fees, and complete community service or make restitution to victims. Participants typically undergo random, weekly drug and alcohol testing and attend regular status hearings in court, during which the judge reviews their progress in treatment and may impose a range of consequences contingent upon performance. These consequences may include desired rewards, for example, verbal praise, reduced supervision, or token gifts, in fact, from time to time, such as a gift card to a store, in order to commend them for their good works. Now, that's a strange thing in the community justice system. I'm sure you would all agree. The first time I offered a gift to a defendant, he about fell over in court. Modifications to the participant's treatment plan, for example, we may give them a little less intensive modality of care. And sometimes we have punitive sanctions, written assignments, community service, or brief jail detention. Sometimes we'll do that. The consequences are typically administered by a judge in open court after a drug court team has met in a non-adversarial way to review the case and reach a tentative determination about the appropriate course of action. The various team members contribute based upon their respective specialties. However, the judge is legally and ethically required to determine what the consequences are going to be imposed after giving due consideration to all the members. For example, just to give you a better example of how this works, say if I have a docket, a criminal docket in the afternoon, and part of my docket is the drug court docket. I'll meet with many individuals similar to who are sitting on with me today in a collaborative fashion. You as practitioners, you've monitored that individual during the last week. You've tested that individual during the last week. You've seen how they're doing trying to get work. You're seeing how they're doing trying to improve their education. You're seeing how they're doing getting back as far as being reunited with their families. And you communicate that to the judge. So for the mental health worker may say, you know, Judge, he's not maintaining his medications at this time, if you have a co-occurring individual. Or you may have a police officer saying, you know, we had a knock and chat, meaning that I went out to his house at 2 o'clock in the morning because we had curfew conditions placed upon that particular offender, and he was there, or he was not there. And so that's what we pretty much do. We'll talk to the educators, particularly dealing with young people. How are they doing and progressing in their education? Are they attending school? Are they properly going into their classes? Are they being disruptive in school? These are things we get to know based upon everybody that's at the table with us. Then the judge makes a decision. And we come out into the courtroom, then all of us as a team, into the courtroom, and I'll say, Mr. Stein, have you had a good week? Well, he knows, we all know what kind of week he really had, right? So he's very honest with us, which is something new for drug offenders because, as you all know, the disease of addiction is manipulative. You're going to lie a lot, right? You're going to lie a lot. So Mr. Stein knows we're all there, and he knows he can't lie to us. So Mr. Stein may say, well, Judge, you know, I was tested, but that test wasn't really accurate, right? We hear that from time to time. And they will say, well, okay, Mr. Stein, what we'll do is we'll send your sample out for additional testing, and you have to pay for it if it's positive, right? Well, then my friend Mr. Stein says, well, maybe it was accurate. Then what we do is we figure out what we're going to do with Mr. Stein that day. If they commit new crimes, understand this, there's some severe sanctions that go along with that. Because many of our people that are on our drug courts are there post-plea. That's the majority of people in our adult drug courts. They've entered a guilty plea to that charge. And the primary reason that is done is that the prosecutors want a guilty plea in case that individual does not comply. Because if they don't plea, this case may go on 8 months down the road and they're coming back into court now. So witnesses may have been gone, evidence is no longer there. So they like to have a plea. So what will happen is post-plea, there may be a presumptive sentence. In Minnesota and throughout the United States, we have what they call presumptive sentencing guidelines. That means if you commit a certain type of offense, such as drug offenses, you have a presumptive, what they call a presumptive commit to prison. Usually 4 years or longer, depending on what type of drug offense you're dealing with. And that was driven in my state primarily because we had a very high use of methamphetamine, which I understand you don't have. It's a major problem in Italy. But we had a lot of methamphetamine use. So they crafted some laws because when people were using methamphetamine, they would stay awake for hours, hours and hours and hours, and commit horrendous crimes, including murder. And what we would see, of course, is the headlines, in the newspapers. The headlines in the newspapers sometimes direct legislation, good or bad. So people react to that. And they said, oh my gosh, what we have to do with these individuals is to put them in prison. Now some of them may not be violent offenders. And the drug courts are for those who are non-violent offenders. Understand that, non-violent. So if you commit a crime with a gun, you're not going to be coming into our drug courts. That's not going to happen. When I say that, one of the issues we are having in the United States, of course, because of our wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, is we're having a number of our military people come back. I think 25% have been diagnosed with alcoholism, alcohol dependence. 20% are coming back with post-traumatic stress syndrome, conditions that are very, very significant. And as a result, the crimes they are committing are primarily crimes of domestic assault. And in the military, as you know, if you want to stay active duty, you have to have a firearm. And if you commit a domestic assault in our state, you lose your right to have a firearm. So they get kicked out of the military. So we have what they call veterans treatment courts now as well, which are based upon the drug court model in our country. And we've had tremendous success with these people. In my juvenile substance abuse court, when we talk about prevention, again, we are dealing with the human condition. Let's never forget this, the human condition. And young people, and the doctor and I have had an opportunity to discuss this, as you all know in the neuroscience field, the brain develops from the back to the front. the brain weighs 3 pounds. So from 0 to 2 years, your gray matter of your brain is developing very rapidly. And that's when we're learning how to crawl and do some basic skills. The next most rapid advance of gray matter is during the adolescent period, 14, 15, 16. What is happening in that child's life during that period of time is a significant predictor of what that child may be as an adult. And by that I mean, as the doctor can, I'm sure, comment on, what the brain will not use, it will basically get rid of, it will prune. But what the brain is using, it will hardwire. So if a young person sees his mother or father fighting or dad punching the mother, that may be a behavior that's ingrained in that young person that may create a condition for him as an adult or her as an adult. And if that person is starting to use chronically as a young person, using drugs or alcohol, it's a very strong predictor of them becoming an addict as an adult. And as the doctor knows as well, the prefrontal cortex of the brain is the last part of the brain to develop. And that's what you deal with rational thinking, impulse control to some extent. And that was interesting for me as a judge to learn, because I have people coming to my court that are young, and I'll have someone coming in telling me, they're going 110, 120 miles an hour on the highway. And I'll ask them, why did you do that? And they'll say, I don't know. And you know what? Sometimes they don't have a reason for it. And that's about as basic as it gets. They don't know. So they're tremendous risk takers. So when you talk about prevention, as Dr. Stein did so eloquently, the real issue comes down to this. Children visualize. They see things. That has an impact on them, what they see. And in our courts, what we'll do from time to time is we'll bring juveniles into our adult court when we are sentencing someone to prison who has just committed a crime, a drug crime or an alcohol crime, and they are actually going to prison. When they watch that, that has an impact on them. The other impact that we have in our community, when Dr. Stein talks about local community action, in our high school we go through a process of a mock crash where the state police come in with a vehicle that has been smashed up in an actual accident involving a fatality. And they have students, lying by the vehicle that have been killed. And they're taken off to the hospital. Then they take the students to our courts on like an arraignment calendar or a first appearance in our courts. And they're held in handcuffs and ankle shackles, and they come into our courts. It gets very real to them then, very real. And then we hold them in our holding cell for a little while, which isn't a nice place. But it becomes real to them, and that has a direct impact on what they think and what they do is when they go back in the communities. But children, as you all know, things don't last very long with them. I mean, you have to keep refreshing this idea of the sadness, if you will, and the impact of what happens when they abuse drugs or alcohol. I had a young girl in my juvenile drug court that came in at one time, and that young girl was a meth addict, 15 years of age, technically not addicted under a DSM-4 criteria, but a chronic user. She came out of my holding cell, all disheveled, of course, agitated brain, because the drug is just starting to come out of her system, very fired up, as you can imagine. And we were going to put her in our juvenile drug court. And she looked at me, and I looked at her, and I said, I'm not going to give up on you. And she looked back at me and said, I'm not going to give up on you either. And I thought, what the heck does that mean? But let me tell you, this girl had no family life. Her mother was an alcoholic. And when they would come into our court, some of them, the parents were drunk. I mean, think of this. So when you talk about the environment and the safety conditions involved, I have to take this child from my drug court and put her back with that family on a weekly basis. Very difficult. So what I would do is I would encourage child protection to come in and say that that family is a threat to this child environmentally because they're addicts. What we started learning is that some of the parents would benefit from our juvenile drug court, from their own children, seeing what they were going through. So there was a benefit there. And they started getting to treatment. They started going to AA. They started doing all this stuff. Well, this young lady I'm referring to, when I saw her, she was failing high school. No job. Just in a tough, tough condition. When she finished drug courts 14 months later, she graduated from high school. She is now a college graduate, reunited with her family. Her parents got sober. What a wonderful story. Because a lot of these people, what we see, a lot of these young ladies, are also pregnant. I mean, think of that. And when you talk about the residual public safety risk, these young people, if they were not in our courts, going through this type of recovery treatment court, what would happen to their young baby? I mean, it's an incredible, incredible story. So we don't live in a vacuum. We deal with the human condition each and every day of our lives. And we can do better, and I really believe we can do better. What I tell a lot of young people when we talk about prevention again, is I always tell them, look, play it forward. Like if you had a video camera, and you would think, okay, I'm going to go out with my friends tonight, and we're going to video what I'm doing. And we're going to stop at a grocery store, and we're going to buy some alcohol, and we're going to drive off, and we're going to get in a crash, and we're going to injure somebody, and they're going to come back into our court, and they have to see a judge, and they have to go to jail. Now, if you played that on a video, is that the result you would want if you played that forward? And to each and every one of them will say no. Of course not. But they don't play it forward. They don't anticipate the consequences of their actions, and that's what we try to teach young people. Because I'm a firm believer after being in this business as long as I have been, that that's where it starts. We cannot wait until they become adults in our system. It's much more cost ineffective, if you will. It's much more of a risk to public safety once they are ingrained addicts. We cannot start at that point. Now, we use in our drug treatment courts what they call 10 key components. They were developed in 1996 by drug court professionals, and I've handed some copies to Director Simeone, and if some of you want them when you leave, you can pick them up from her. But basically, and I'm not going to go through all the components at this time because our time is limited and I want to address some other issues. But basically, we have found that people that follow the 10 key components of drug court, meaning the drug court model, are the most successful models. Drug courts are primarily reserved for those people that have been determined to be high risk, high need offenders. High risk, high need. As you know, many of you use assessment tools when you in your particular professions. And those high risk are primarily, what they primarily look at is criminal history and the nature of the crime. So we try to determine, of course, based upon that, if they are a good fit for the drug court. And high need means a type of wraparound services that they may have need. The people in drug courts are there because they have repeatedly failed in treatment. Repeatedly. And if you could see, as Director Mineta has indicated and others, a graduation ceremony at a drug court, because we actually have a ceremony for graduates when they do come out of drug court. The tremendous tears of family members who never thought that their child could recover. Never. And when I was doing my juvenile drug court, and my wife is here today and she could tell you this as well, I would get calls at my house from parents of young people who have not committed a crime, who wanted to be put in the juvenile drug court. And of course, we couldn't put them there because they had not committed a crime. That was reserved for people that had committed crimes. So for the low risk, low need offenders, diversion programs. But they have to have the recovery element in that as well, so that they can be properly assessed and treated up front so they don't become the high risk, high need offender. And that's what we're hoping for by the development of these particular courts. Now, substance abuse is indicated in the United States in 81% of child abuse and neglect cases. 81%. So, of course, we have family dependency treatment courts as well to deal with that problem. Of the 14 million arrested annually in the United States, two-thirds will test positive for chemicals. Two-thirds. At any one time, we can have up to 5 million addicts in our criminal justice system. Many individuals that appear in our courts in the U.S. with alcohol and other drug addictions also have co-occurring or comorbidity mental health issues. Big problem. But as you all know in the field, and my good friend the doctor also knows, without resources, without sufficient resources, what do we do? What do we do? We do our best, right? We do our best. Because some of our people don't have insurance in the United States, so they can't get private coverage or private recovery, if you will. We have what they call in my state Rule 25 funding for chemical health treatment, which is a consortium, if you will, of public health dollars going into a system so they can get chemical health treatment. But primarily what they want to do in the United States, including insurance companies, they want us to first go through outpatient programs. Outpatient. Until they fail outpatient, they don't want to put them in inpatient. Well, our outpatient programs are 28 days. 28 days. You know, and you have someone that may have had a significant addiction, and then looking at a 28-day program, they don't work real well for that person. As you all know, long-term inpatient treatment with supportive services and cognitive behavioral changes are necessary to get that person back into our society. And why do we want that? Why do we want that person back into our society? So they can be productive, so that they're not committing crime, and they can be taxpayers. They're not a tax to our public health system. In the United States, what concerns me, we have also an aging population in our country. And we're starting to see a rise in the elderly population that are suffering from substance abuse conditions. I mean, think of that. Where are they all going to go? You know, how are we going to have the resource to treat that population long term? These are all significant public policy issues that we have to take a look at. In 2008, the Department of U.S. Justice identified 1.2 million individuals in the criminal justice system who could be served by drug courts. If only critical funding was available to expand program capacity, because currently we have about 120,000 participating, that's all, out of 1.2 million that could use it. As more and more individuals are appearing on our court dockets with alcohol and other drug offenses, the cost to our taxpayers face significant increases. It is critical that in difficult times, it is essential to spend tax dollars wisely on evidence-based strategies that are proven to be productive strategies. Federal and state expenditures on corrections in the United States now will exceed $60 billion annually. $60 billion on correction cost. On average, states will spend in the United States, individual states will spend $65,000 per bed to build a new prison, and roughly $25,000 per bed to operate them. I believe in Italy, and I was talking to the doctor about this, you have about 60,000 incarcerated, with about half of that being drug offenders as a proportion to the total prison population. Again, that's very costly to the government of Italy and to the taxpayers. While the U.S. Department of Justice estimates costs relating to corrections at $60 billion, I believe the ONDCP also has estimated costs attributed to substance abuse at $143 billion, with 62% related to crime-related costs and 38% related to non-crime-related costs. In the U.S., where we have 2.3 million adults now behind bars, 2.3 million adults behind bars, Drug and alcohol abuse drives much of the explosion in the population of our prisons. Approximately 80% of our inmates in our state correctional facilities have a serious history of substance abuse, and half are clinically addicted to drugs or alcohol. Half of our prisoners. More than 3/4 of state inmates were incarcerated for a nonviolent offense, and most of them have no history of a violent offense anywhere on their record. Now, the problem with that is this. In prisons, we have limited budgets for treatment. I don't know if that happens in Italy or not, but we have limited budgets within the prison system for treatment. And what happens, of course, is many of our prisoners are there with co-occurring disorders, mental health conditions, and if you commit a disciplinary offense in prison, you're not eligible for services. Now think of that. So what happens? They come out after serving their prison sentence, and someone had mentioned because of their records, they don't have a job, they can't find housing. What are they going to do you think? Well, what they're going to do is they're going to reoffend. And the statistics bear that out very, very thoroughly. Statistics show that upon release from prison, between 60 and 80% of drug abusers commit a new crime upon release of prison. And 85% to 95% will relapse quickly. And more than half will return to the prison system. I mean, that's an incredible statistics. I'm going to try to move along because I know we have a limited time today. 20 years over 20 years now since the first drug court was established, there has been more research published on the effectiveness of drug courts than virtually all other criminal justice programs combined. The scientific community has put drug court under its microscope because, of course, anytime you request federal or state funding, the policymakers want to make sure these work. And what we have found in the United States, and this gives you all the indication that you need and all the verification that you need, we have bipartisan support in our Congress for the funding of drug courts. Bipartisan. So from the most liberal end of the party to the most conservative end of the party, they all support these programs, which obviously is the best verifier of whether or not these work, because you don't get that very often, at least in our country anymore, as far as bipartisan support. Evidence shows that drug courts reduce crime is supported by the fact in the United States, 75% of drug court participants remain arrest-free at least 2 years after leaving the program, with most studies showing that they remain arrest-free up to 14 years after leaving the program. Compare this to the typical rearrest rates of people coming out of prison that aren't in drug courts and are on standard probation, which is 46% of probationers commit a new offense, and over 60% will commit a probation violation, not to mention the rearrest rates, which I have just indicated to you. 5 independent meta-analyses have shown and concluded that drug courts significantly reduce crime by as much as 35% to 45% in comparison to traditional case dispositions. When you examine the cost savings, the results are significant, because as we have the ministers here, all the ministers look at, of course, their budgets as well. How can we get more money into education? How can we get more money into justice or public health? Well, if all the money is going to corrections, obviously that's a problem. And so we can redirect some of these funds if we're smart, And I think we can do that by prioritizing where the money should go and what our best results are from our investment. That's really what it comes down to. What's the best result of our investment? So again, when you look at the traditional justice system, where national expenditures are about $60 billion at a cost of $22,000 per prisoner, with only a 30% success rate of drug abusers released from prison, compared to drug courts, the cost total expenditures, $306 million in the United States, is compared to $60 billion. Which one would you want to choose if you were a policymaker? I mean, think of that. It's a no-brainer. And particularly when you look at the 75% success rates we're referring to. So that's at an average cost of about $7,000 per drug court participant versus about $28,000 per participant when they're in prison and they're having terrible outcomes. So I believe that drug courts are a solution in the criminal justice system. I wish when I was a practicing lawyer we had drug courts, because what I saw as a lawyer is if you get old enough, you start seeing families and sons of people you represented back into the courts with the same problems, When we do a pre-sentence investigation, when I'm sending someone into a prison, probation agents will prepare what they call a pre-sentence investigation report. And when I look at these adults, and one of the conditions in history they look at is onset of use. And onset of use, 14, 15, 16 years of age. And you know what? They weren't treated. And you know what? Now they're going to prison. Is that right? Is that how we should do business? Not only in the United States, but throughout the world? No, that's not how we operate. So, again, I thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk to you today. You've been an attentive audience. I know sometimes these type of conferences can get very laborious and you get tired and things, but I appreciate your interest. And again, I commend each and every one of you today for the tremendous work you all do, because without you out in the field, the problem would be much greater. So thank you very much.
Bene, spero che abbiate apprezzato non solo la competenza e la multidisciplinarietà, no? Dalle neuroscienze alla competenza chiaramente legale e giuridica che ha, ma anche quella dell'analisi dei costi, ma anche la sensibilità che ha dimostrato su un tappeto di umanità che io ogni volta che lo sento mi commuovo e devo dire che apprezzo moltissimo. Anche i suoi colleghi che abbiamo incontrato negli Stati Uniti avevano lo stesso grado di motivazione. E per quello che mi riguarda e per le cose che io posso percepire, oltre che conoscere, il fatto che un giudice come un operatore sanitario, quali siamo noi medici, eccetera, abbia questa forza, questa passione, questa motivazione a svolgere la sua professione in questo modo è già il 70% della cura del tossicodipendente, perché lo avverte moltissimo il tossicodipendente quando tu ti stai curando realmente, significativamente e in modo impegnato, serio nei suoi confronti, anche se magari hai degli scontri, hai delle difficoltà, hai delle necessità poi di doverlo in qualche modo sanzionare, come capita con i giudici, e a volte a doverlo riprendere, come a volte capita anche con i medici. Ecco, però questa forza che dà questa umanità di fondo è sicuramente una forza vincente. Io lascio la parola a Kevin, prego.
Volevo riprendere quello che tu hai detto e dire che appunto, come hai detto tu, noi abbiamo avuto più volte la fortuna appunto di vedere questo modello in azione. Noi parliamo sempre della necessità della certezza della pena. Prima abbiamo parlato della fondamentale importanza dell'approccio educativo. Qui, come ci ha esposto prima il giudice, è fondamentale la regola. La prima volta che mi è stato presentato questo modello 2 anni fa è stato presentato in modo forse anche semplicistico, ma assolutamente d'effetto, come il modello del bastone e della carota. E vedendo il giudice in azione, vedendo i giudici in azione, questo è proprio il modo effettivo per delineare questo modello, perché il giudice in quel momento non è solo un giudice, ma è un medico, è un educatore ed è un insegnante, e questa è la cosa assolutamente fondamentale di questo tipo di approccio. Grazie.
Prego, Kevin.
Thank you very much, Dr. Serpoloni and Dr. Simeoni and the very able staff of the department, the anti-drug department here based in Rome, that is small staff but very efficient and effective. And some of one thing I said yesterday, which I really believe is that this kind of meeting is not happening anywhere else, certainly in Europe or throughout the world, where we're bringing together people to talk about innovative criminal justice and prevention strategies that actually have an evidence base and work really outside the normal paradigm of a discussion of these issues. You know, I think that oftentimes, and I've said this before, but I'm going to keep saying it because I really believe it, there is this illogical and erroneous dichotomous debate between dealing with this issue as a health issue or a safety issue, as if they are incompatible, health and safety, and as you have to either go one way or another. That is, you either treat this only like a medical disease or in a way such as doctors providing drugs or legalization, or you can only treat this like a criminal justice issue that is a crime and everybody needs to be in jail for long periods of time who are caught using drugs. And that is not the real world where the evidence is. That's not the world we live in. Unfortunately, people manipulate the debate for their own interests and present the debate that way. And the reality is, we know that there are these interventions that we're speaking about are what I call smart justice and smart health. It's an innovative, evidence-based, smart way to combine these two ideas, which often are presented as opposites, when in reality, they are not opposites. So I think that's the sort of a philosophical underpinning of this entire meeting. And this government here in Italy has been on the cutting edge of creating this kind of discussion. And that is key to making any progress here. When I think about drug dependence and addiction, again, there are parallels with medical conditions like diabetes or hypertension. If you look at the cost to health, if you look at many of the characteristics of addiction, but there are differences too, and there are important differences. The one biggest difference in my mind is that unlike the diseases of diabetes or hypertension, drug addiction causes crime. And it affects people in more ways than just healthcare costs or personal family costs. It affects workers, it affects productivity, it affects, again, crime, property crimes, violent crimes, and that makes drug addiction and dependence, in my mind, a very unique, what I call biobehavioral disorder, a disorder that is biological, but that is also behavioral. And so if that's the premise, we have to target drug addiction in this way, of both the mind and the biological processes, but also in the behavior of people. And one of the ways that criminology theory has discussed behavior change, one of the most studied concepts in criminology, is through this idea of deterrence. What makes a person prevent them from conducting some activity that is undesirable? And what deterrence theory has shown over and over again is that the way to prevent something like drug abuse or other things are through what we call swift, certain, and modest sanctions. So a sanction that happens close to the behavior that has been exhibited, and that the fact that that sanction is almost certain to happen, and that sanction, in terms of the level of severity, does not have to be very, very severe in order for it to work. It, more importantly, needs to be what we call swift and certain. And unfortunately, certainly in the United States, but I think also throughout Europe and really throughout the world, the criminal justice system dealing with this specific issue is, if I had to choose one word, would be clumsy. And it's clumsy because it often attributes, rather than swift and certain sanctions, it often is delayed, random, and severe sanctions. So in other words, the punishment comes far after the crime because of the bureaucratic processes of processing somebody. That's the first thing that happens. The second thing is, because of the other bureaucratic processes and the many different people involved in that process, the sanction is often randomly applied. So it applies to you because you live in a certain area where there are a lot of law enforcement, and because maybe of your economic background, you are not inside your house, you are outside, because you are outside, you have been noticed to do this behavior, and you are being apprehended. Or it doesn't apply to you because you had a very good lawyer and there was a technical mistake, and the judge knows about the smart, clever lawyers. There's a technical mistake, and therefore you're going to be out free. And so it's very random in that way. And then finally, severe, because this is a condition, a disease that affects a lot of people in very serious ways, and I think it's just human nature and natural to think that in order to prevent it to happen, we need to give people very strong sentences. But I think, unfortunately, in our pursuit of those strong sentences, we've forgotten about the more important elements, which are swiftness and certainty. And that, I think, drug courts is an example of swiftness and certainty, of actually doing something where giving somebody a punishment that's close to the crime, and that is most certainly going to happen. And the judge talked about that procedure. Before I go into a few of my slides, and I'm going to try and make this short because I know we have lunch and people want to get out and also get into a discussion. The analogy that I used yesterday, and I'll use it again for those that weren't here, is sort of the analogy that I think any parent would use for their child in terms of when we're trying to prevent criminal behavior. And that analogy is this. Imagine if you told your child, and this is really how I believe, at least in the U.S., most of our criminal justice system is operating, is something like this. It's like telling your child, Jonathan, or if we were in Italy, Giovanni, we say, you have to clean your room right now. I'm your father, and you must clean your room. So if you don't clean your room, little Jonathan, there is a 10% chance that in 6 months, I'm going to punish you for 2 years. Imagine if you told your child that there's only a 10% chance in 6 months that I'm going to punish you for 2 years. Your child probably wouldn't clean their room because that's a delayed sanction. Even though 2 years is very severe, that kind of reasoning is not something that the child is interested in immediate gratification. So if the child can go play with his friends and not clean his room with that kind of threat, that's not going to change his behavior. Imagine, though, if you told that child the opposite. If you turned that around and said, Johnny, if you don't clean your room right now, there is a 100% chance that tonight you are not going to go to the movies with your friends, or you're not going to see your favorite television show that is happening in 1 hour if you don't clean your room right now. I bet you that your child will then clean their room because they didn't need the threat of a 2-year punishment to make them change their behavior. They needed the immediate threat. And that is often the case within the criminal justice system because we know that criminals act often in a way where their pleasure, they don't find value in delayed pleasure. They would rather take $1 now than $10 in a week. I mean, that's also human nature. And imagine with criminal impulsive behaviors. So the challenge that we need to do, I think, is to create those environments that in the criminal justice system that speeds up that process. So we talked a little bit in the United States of the 2 million adults that are in prison right now. 5 million of them, so double that number, 5 million are actually living in the community under the system that the judge talked about, probation. And so these people have been let out by the courts because there's not enough room in jail, or they are let out for good behavior or whatever. And they're living amongst the general population. And that population is growing. They oftentimes have to comply with certain conditions, but the reality is, and this is the bureaucratic public administration problem more than anything, they're not monitored very strictly because there are many people in the system. They're not able to keep up. They don't do a lot of drug testing. And unless they're in a drug court or in one of these programs I'm going to talk about, they're just not able to keep up with them in the system. And we talked about the fact that they're often impulsive and don't consider long-term consequences. So these people in the criminal justice system, the reason they keep going in and out of the system is that they learn that they can keep reoffending or violate their terms, and there are often no consequences. I mean, oftentimes judges are so overwhelmed by the number of people in the system, they have to say, you know what, this is your first time making a mistake, I'll let you go. Just, try and do better next time. More often than not, that judge will see that person again and again and again and again, unless there is an intervention, like the drug court that we talked about. only sending them to drug treatment without the threat of reincarceration. And this is why when we talk about decriminalization or criminalization, this is one of the reasons why drug use in the United States is still a crime. Because we're able to use that threat of the criminal sanction in order to change behavior. And for a lot of people, even with a disease of addiction, that threat, if properly carried out, is enough to change their behavior. Sometimes without treatment, oftentimes with treatment. But to take that element out entirely and only divert to treatment, the data shows that the completion rates are very low. They're much better when you have that threat of incarceration or some kind of monitoring, some kind of consequence that's tied to that. And so that's very important. And the bottom line is many of these probationers, if I can use this, need housing, job training, and health care. So only sending them to treatment for 30 days and then they're out into the community, if they don't have those community supports and they don't have job training, et cetera, for many of them, we expect them to change their lives in 30 days like that? I mean, that doesn't make sense to me. Can you imagine if you were obese and you just went on a diet for 30 days and then after 30 days you could eat whatever you wanted? Why do we treat drug addiction that way? It doesn't make any sense. And that's why we see the low completion rates, and that's why we need to change things. There are new models that we had referred to. One of those models that is the most tested and is the most evidence-based, because it has frankly been around the longest and is the most complete, are drug courts. And the judge talked about them. They started in 1989. There are thousands throughout the United States. And the judge went through the procedure, but essentially you bring the physicians, you bring the social workers, you bring the families, you bring the people in the community, the law enforcement, and they are all with the judge together, because this is, again, a unique biobehavioral disorder. This is not any other crime. This is not, you robbed a bank, so you get 2 years in jail. Goodbye. I don't need to see the doctor to tell you that you should go to jail for robbing a bank. But you're addicted to drugs, it's a different story. That requires multiple people working together for the success of that person, and that's what drug courts are. They've been successful. They've saved jail space. They are very cost effective in terms of reducing costs related to health care, victimization, recidivism, etc. Another model that has been tried are essentially, just to simplify things, drug courts but without the treatment. In other words, they say, look, we have a limited number of treatment available. We're going to try simply this, what we talked about, the deterrence theory, simply the true threat of criminal justice entry. In other words, a true threat of a few days in jail. We're going to see if that changes behavior. And a judge tried it in 2004 in Hawaii. He was a former U.S. attorney, federal prosecutor under President Clinton, very innovative person. And he said, you know what, I'm seeing the same people in my court over and over and over again. And, the 10th time I see them, my hands are tied, and I have to send them to prison for 5 years. And I don't think 5 years in prison are going to help them. So we have to think of something new. So he basically used different elements. For example, 30 years ago when physicians in the United States were, and still now around the world, physicians, doctors have access, of course, cheap access to drugs. And we know that of all professions, doctors and physicians are actually the most addictive using members of the professional world. Okay? That's simply because the supply is there and it's cheap. And they started these physician health programs where they would drug test physicians. And they would basically say, if you test positive, you will be randomly tested. If you test positive, you will lose your license for a certain amount of time while you go to treatment, and then you'll have to come back. And when you come back, you're going to be tested again. They found that dramatically reduced physicians testing positive for drugs. That's called the physician health program. So this judge applied this to people in Hawaii, mainly methamphetamine users. So mainly people who were addicted or dependent or using methamphetamine, which we all know is a very toxic stimulant. And basically what this judge said is, look, you're going to be in the community as a probationer, but you have a responsibility. Every day you pick up the phone, you will call a phone number. If your name is mentioned by the phone message, in half an hour you must report to the police station and do a drug test. If you test positive, immediately there will be a lawyer for you. The judge will be right there. And on the spot, we're going to send you to jail for 2 to 3 days. not for 10 years, but for 2 days. It's an unpleasant experience. And if you have a job, we'll make sure to send you to jail on the weekend so you don't lose your job, okay? They did that, and they because they didn't have treatment, so they had to just try this. They tried this, and they found that they had a 70% reduction in urinalysis positives for methamphetamine in a 6-month period. And they talked to the offenders, and the offenders said, you know what? I feel like I was treated very fairly. I used drugs, and you caught me, and you didn't send me to jail for 5 years. I didn't have to wait in a holding cell for 12 hours while I got my lawyer, and then I saw the judge 3 days later. On the spot, instead, you gave me my punishment. And that changed the behavior. And now, obviously, there is a certain percentage of the population where the 2 days in jail isn't going to work. They are way down the continuum for addiction. These are the high-risk offenders that the Judge Rancourt talked about. Those people are now funneled to drug court, which is essentially the same program but with treatment. So they go to drug court, they're treated, they are drug tested. If they test negative and they continue with treatment, they do not have a record. So they can move on with their life. If they keep testing positive, they get more intensive treatment and they will go to jail. But they have found that the vast majority of people respond to either this HOPE model or the drug court model. They're not sending people to jail because people were very worried in the beginning of this program. They said, we don't have room for these people. You're going to put hundreds of people in jail for 2 days. Even for 2 days, we don't have room. You're going to increase the jail population. And the opposite happened. They decreased the jail population because they didn't have to impose a sanction. The most famous quote in public policy is this. It says Thomas Schelling, who said, the best threat is the one that never has to be carried out. Right? That's the most effective threat, is the one that you never have to impose. And that is what this is doing. It's a credible threat, but they often don't have to impose it. And that's the whole use. So then after this happened, the state of South Dakota, a rural state, had a huge problem with drunk driving. Okay, imagine the state of South Dakota, huge freeways, not a big population, 100 miles an hour. We're not as skilled drivers as you are in Italy, so we can't handle going 150 kilometers an hour on the roads. There were many drunk driving offenses, people with alcohol-related driving, and they said, we don't have room in jail. It's killing people. We need to do something different. So they basically borrowed this model, and they said, okay, if you have been convicted of drunk driving in the last 6 months, you must come twice a day to the police station and pay yourself $2 to get an alcohol test. Breathe and see if you're sober. If you're sober, that's fine. We'll let you go. If not, you're going to have a swift consequence. And they essentially put them in jail for 1 to 2 days, as opposed to, if you get an offense in the United States for drunk driving, it's a very serious offense leading to months and months and years in jail. So rather than that happening, before that happened, they did the test and gave 1 to 2 days in jail. They also often gave them an ankle or a wrist bracelet to monitor their alcohol use. And they have found a very significant reduction in drunk driving in that state as a result of this. It's simply applying what we know about how you get a kid to do their homework. You apply to criminals, and it seems to be working, and it's working with drug courts. It's very exciting. Obviously, there are challenges. The biggest challenge is that for these to work, you need to have a coordination among the public agencies, among the bureaucracy. Because imagine if you're trying to implement this program and the judge doesn't agree with it. Well, if you don't have no judge, you're not going to have any implementation of the penalty. So there goes your program. If you don't have a lawyer there that agrees to this, you can't do your program. If you don't have a probation officer who's going to give the drug testing, you don't have your program. If you don't have the person processing in the morning, randomly choosing which offender will be drug tested for the day, you won't have your program. So it requires a very sophisticated amount of cooperation over several public agencies. That's a big challenge. And oftentimes in these drug meetings, we talk about the challenge of changing addict behavior and preventing drug use. That's important. It's just as important that we implement the programs that we know work, that we implement them in an effective way, because otherwise, what's the point? I'm going to end with this. The evaluation of a very similar drug court program in Washington, D.C. 15 years ago ended with this line, which I think is very telling. And the line was that we have learned that through these programs, we have learned that it is very easy to change criminal behavior. It's often very hard to change justice officials' behavior. In other words, the judges, the prosecutors, the probation, that's the behavior it's hard to change because they want to do it the old way, most of them. Judge Rancourt is unfortunately in the minority, and that's why he's here, because we want more of him. But most judges and prosecutors and probation officers, look, it's very easy to do business as usual. But unfortunately, business as usual isn't cutting it. It's costing us way too much money. It's costing human lives and social disaster. So we must change the system. That's the kind of effective discussion that we want to be able to promote with your help on the international level. So the discussions about legalization that are in the newspaper, that is a distraction and it means nothing. Unfortunately, that is what journalists and the media and others want to highlight. That's not where the action is, though. The action is in discussing how to make the system work better, how to use evidence to actually reduce drug use and addiction, not these flashy debates about the legalization of marijuana. That's not going to help us. But what will help us are these kinds of discussions where we talk about how to create the environment for addiction to be reduced and for consequences to be enforced in a fair and judicious manner. So I'll end there. Thank you.
Grazie Kevin, credo che questa seconda relazione, nell'ambito della giustizia, quindi del carcere, abbia completato veramente la panoramica e l'approccio, il modello che ci stimola anche a riflettere molto. Io faccio subito una domanda però prima sia a Kevin ma anche al dottor Mineta, perché sappiamo che in Italia è arrivata una notizia un po' distorta dai giornali, ne approfitto relativamente alle ultime cose che tu hai detto, che il Presidente Obama e il governo del Presidente Obama sarebbe favorevole alla legalizzazione della marijuana. Siccome questa cosa è girata sui giornali, è girata in tante TV e molti politici che sono propensi alla legalizzazione della marijuana ne hanno fatto anche una bandiera, no? Vorremmo sapere la posizione ufficiale del governo americano, visto che abbiamo la possibilità di averlo qui oggi. Grazie.
Thank you, Professor. We want to make this very clear. The United States government, the Obama administration, the president are opposed to legalization of marijuana. That's very clear for us. The director, as he goes out and makes speeches, he says all over the country, wherever we can go, that that is a non-starter for a policy for us. It's just not the position of the government.
See, now that I'm not in government, I'm allowed to say things that my former colleague can't say. But I will do so with tactfulness. I just wanted to say one thing about this issue of the media reporting the administration. You have to remember, the campaign to legalize drugs, and it's a legitimate discussion, and we should have an open, freedom of speech, and people can think whatever they want, and we should have a discussion. But the campaign to do so is multi-million dollar coordinated campaign around the world to do this. This isn't just people in their basements on their computer writing an article that their friends will read. These are very sophisticated folks, educated people who believe in this, very rich people like Richard Branson or George Soros who put a lot of money in this. And so this is a strategy that they have. So part of the strategy, of course, and this is not a conspiracy theory type of thing, this is just strategy for politics. Part of the strategy, of course, is to forward misinformation about the positions of various governments so that people think in their minds that this idea of legalization is legitimate. So, when you have somebody who's as popular as President Obama is abroad, and you say, if you can tie legalization or misconstrue comments and tie it with the president and present this as a fact, this is very good for your cause, even if there's no factual basis for it. So, of course, it is in the interest of those who promote legalization to promote this kind of misinformation. We saw this very similarly with something called the Global Commission on Drugs. I don't know, have any of you heard of this Global Commission on Drug Policy? Raise your hand. Okay, some people. Anyway, it was Richard Branson, and they had the former president of Switzerland, etc. Because this was a global commission, many of the press reports discussed that this was a United Nations official position of legalization. And that nobody went out of their way to tell them, no, this is not the United Nations. This is just a self-appointed commission that came out with a report in favor of legalization. But of course, it's the interest of those who promote it to say, to not negate the fact that, hey, maybe this is a UN-promoted thing to gain legitimacy. So I think we just need to be very careful when we listen to media reports and other reports about who's supporting who. If you look very clearly on the president's website at marijuana, he's actually taken a very courageous stance against marijuana. You have to remember, almost 50% of Americans believe in marijuana legalization right now. And a large majority of young people believe in it because they think that it's harmless, they think that it doesn't cause addiction, they think it's not connected to schizophrenia and psychosis, they think it's not a big deal. And so, frankly, a large part of the president's political base, which are young people, believe in legalization. Yet the president has been very clear, regardless of that fact, that it's not in the public health or safety interest of the country. And that's just public information.
We could just to expand on that point as well. One of the things that's very clear about this position, again, against legalization, is that also is what the president is for. He's, again, for this public health approach. He's for demand reduction. He's trying to reduce the demand for drugs. We feel that is counterproductive. The legalization effort is diametrically opposed, counterproductive to reducing the demand for drugs. And in particularly, he's concerned about, again, the prevention efforts, our treatment efforts, and in recovery support programs as well. So I think it's very, very important, when you say, well, you're not for this, but we are for this. And in that way, I think, again, this is a very important discussion, and being here in Italy with such a close partner on drug policy, international drug policy, again, it's very important that we're here and showing our support for the efforts here in Italy and how that supports our efforts domestically within the United States as well. So, thank you.
Grazie, mi sembrava un chiarimento dovuto e doveroso, in maniera che non lasciamo ombre e dubbi dopo questa diciamo, denota della delegazione americana in Italia. Ci sono domande, so che è un po' tardino, abbiamo sfondato, ma volentieri se c'è qualche intervento o qualcuno che vuole chiedere dei chiarimenti. Prego. Arriva il microfono.
Grazie. Saluto tutti i partecipanti. Sente? Vorrei chiedere al giudice della Corte se tutto questo sistema della drug court è inserito, incardinato nel sistema giudiziario americano o è al di fuori, cioè è un sistema trovato per affrontare il problema della droga in modo diverso. Poi volevo sapere se la persona tossicodipendente partecipa finanziariamente al suo programma di recupero, se è soltanto a spese del governo questo sistema. E poi rinviandomi al problema della legalizzazione della droga. Io sono contraria assolutamente perché fa male la droga. Però in paesi come l'Olanda, che invece è legalizzata, è diminuita l'uso della droga e tutto quello che gira intorno alla droga, quindi tutti i soldi, diciamo, il denaro e le organizzazioni criminali che guadagnano miliardi di euro e di dollari, diciamo, gli vengono sottratti questi soldi. perché non è libera quindi la vendita della droga. Quindi questa particolarità, questa cosa, perché non viene presa in considerazione? Pur, diciamo, o magari tutti e due i sistemi potrebbero essere usati. Comunque ho dimenticato, io mi chiamo Claudio Orlando e sono del Ministero dell'Interno, subito sono entrata nel vivo. Grazie.
Prego. Io volevo invitare i relatori, perché sono domande molto impegnative e molto, che chiederebbero, no? Poi l'entusiasmo ci porterebbe ad essere molto prolifi magari su queste cose qui. Intanto invito la collega del Ministero dell'Interno a leggere il documento che noi abbiamo scritto specificatamente relativamente al perché no la legalizzazione, ecco, dove vengono portate una serie di giustificazioni anche tecnico-scientifiche su questa cosa. Poi do una comunicazione, noi siamo in contatto costante con i nostri colleghi olandesi, no? Quello che appare dai giornali è una cosa, ma quello che appare dai rapporti del Ministero della Salute e dell'Interno olandese è un'altra cosa. Ecco, io vi posso dire veramente molto in sintesi che loro stanno ripensando profondamente le loro strategie sulla base che hanno visto una serie di effetti collaterali sia legati alla salute, ma sia che sono documentati nei rapporti del Ministero della Salute e del Ministro della Salute, sia nei rapporti delle forze dell'ordine, che hanno visto per esempio che l'apertura dei cosiddetti coffee shop ha creato un mercato clandestino non controllabile e una serie di cose negative nell'ordine pubblico sul territorio, che alla fine questi benefici rispetto attesi, rispetto appunto al risparmio di soldi, eccetera, è una cosa che non è vera, in quanto per quanto riguarda inoltre la questione che in Olanda c'è la legalizzazione, se tu ne parli con loro non è così, non te la danno come una legalizzazione, te la presentano come una tolleranza all'uso entro determinate cose, che però sta portando una revisione profonda della politica. Almeno questo è quello che c'è ufficialmente, che viene presentato poi anche sui tavoli europei. Da lì alla versione folcloristica che spesso si trova sui giornali c'è una certa differenza. Io darei prima la parola al giudice e poi la parola a Kevin. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Your first question related to the drug court itself. It is part of our judicial program. Basically what we do in our state of Minnesota, we have 87 distinct counties in our state, and we currently have over 40 drug courts in our state. And it is funded through our judiciary. So it's coming out of our judicial budget. And currently, we have about $2.3 million attributed to drug courts out of our overall judicial budget. And again, it's for high-risk, high-need offenders. So what Dr. Sabat had indicated as well is extremely important. You have to have judges, prosecutors, defense lawyers willing to do this type of program. So what we normally do in United States and in our state is I'm part of a group called the Drug Court Initiative Advisory Committee, which is advisory to our state Supreme Court, which is our judicial governing body in our state. When someone wants a drug court in our state, they have to make a presentation to our body, and they indicate that they are agreeable to go through training, that they are agreeable to follow the 10 key components, and they also submit sustainability plans to us before we approve a recommendation to the Supreme Court that they be allowed funding for drug courts out of our judicial budgets. Because we want to make sure that if they're going to do it, they're going to do it right. Otherwise, evaluations will show it's not cost effective. Now, the next question I believe you asked about the drug addicts themselves. Some courts will require a fee to be paid by the drug addict, $100 sometimes, something like that, for their participation. As we all know, by the time they get to our courts, a lot of them don't have jobs. So it's a real financial burden for them. So, but some courts will require that. As part of the sustainability plan, what we look at in our state is we try to get our counties to become partners, if you will, with the state courts, as well as different agencies to assist us in funding drug courts. Right now, it's all through the judiciary, even though the benefits of those courts are to Health and Human Services, are to Public Safety, are to a number of other agencies. So we're starting to work with them as a collaborative group to try to get one source, if you will, of revenue from all of those agencies that can fund these courts long term. I'm not sure what your last question was. Does that satisfy you? Is that good? Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. Thanks for the question. I think it's important to remember that the picture in the Netherlands is probably more complicated than what it seems on its face. And let me explain that a little bit. First of all, in the Netherlands, as Dr. Serpelloni said, they are very clear in saying that they have not legalized drugs. That in fact what they've done just for marijuana, for cannabis, is take enforcement away from those who buy the drug, correct? So they basically do allow people to go, of course, in the coffee shops and buy a limited amount. What's much more interesting, though, is the question of, okay, if you can buy the drugs, but you can't, if you're selling them as a seller, I'm not allowed to buy them from the supplier, then how can I have the drug to then have somebody legally buy them, right? So it's a paradox. So what happens is these coffee shops are illegally buying, even illegal under Dutch law, buying large quantities of marijuana from the supplier in order to legally sell them and have them be legally purchased. So the effect of that paradox has been that really the criminal organizations in the Netherlands are as prosperous as ever, because they actually have more proceeds than they would normally have, because these people are buying them at a higher price because they're able to sell them at a higher price. So the criminal organizations are just being fed by a sort of quasi-legal setup. And that's very disturbing even to Dutch officials. As Dr. Serpelloni said, they are rethinking their entire policy. The number of coffee shops has been reduced from over 3,000 to around 700 now. And their new law this year, in fact, I'm writing an article about this, and feel free, my website is just kevinsabet.com. It will be on my website next month. This year in the Netherlands, they are not allowing foreigners to buy marijuana anymore. By the end of the year, you have to be a Dutch to buy marijuana. Next year, they're going to restrict it even more, that they're going to cut the number of coffee shops and only allow them in certain areas and open for a certain time. So it's actually that they're dramatically changing their policy. The final point about just what has been the results in the Netherlands of the policy in terms of the use, I think is very important because there's a lot of misinformation there. Certainly, for example, the United States has more drug users of marijuana, cocaine, etc., than the Netherlands. They do. That is true. But the important point is that they've always had more number of users. It's not because of a policy change in the Netherlands that all of a sudden the Netherlands has less users than America. America has always traditionally had a greater demand for drugs than Europe. Although I will tell you, with the cocaine situation, that is changing. Now Europeans use cocaine at a much higher proportion than the U.S. because of a lot of factors, one of them being Colombia. But anyhow, on the Netherlands with marijuana, there is less users. However, within young people, and this is not a statistic that's going to be told oftentimes by Dutch officials because it's not a nice statistic, but there has been a major increase in young people's use of marijuana over the last 15 years if you look at that. And a lot of people think that that is because, not only because of the existence of coffee shops, that's a bit difficult to measure, but actually the commercialization of the coffee shops, the increased promotion of the coffee shops. Because you go to the Netherlands, because in Amsterdam, for example, there are so many coffee shops, they are competing against each other. So they give incentives, they give coupons, they have flyers, they make it a very fun place for young people to go. Since that has been increased, the use among young people has increased. And the other thing that's increased, which is very troubling, and it's in the recent European Monitoring Center report, are the number of people in the Netherlands going to treatment for marijuana. The Netherlands is #1 in Europe for treatment entry of marijuana among young people. It's hard to think of another reason why they are #1 for the treatment of young people in marijuana. I think a lot of it has the fact that there's been an increased number of users. in the Netherlands. So, you know, obviously different cultures implement policies in different ways, and I think it's very difficult to say something has worked in a culture like the Netherlands, which is a small, homogeneous population, compared to somewhere like the United States, which is a much larger population. So there are many complicated factors, but there have been some facts that haven't been discussed as much as they should be.
Grazie, prego.
Io volevo riconfermare, ribadire quanto giustamente affermato sia dal dottor Serpelloni che dal dottor Sabet e portarvi proprio un episodio accaduto in questi giorni che conferma quante diverse siano le cose riportate dai media e quanto diverse in realtà siano le politiche olandesi in materia di droghe. Loro sono seriamente preoccupati della problematica droga e il loro approccio è in continuo cambiamento e si sta avvicinando sempre di più al nostro approccio. Basti pensare che lo scorso anno alla Commissione Stupefacenti delle Nazioni Unite l'Italia ha presentato una risoluzione sul recovery appoggiata dal governo americano. Recovery, cioè recupero totale della persona tossicodipendente. Per far digerire questa parola, cioè la parola recovery, al governo olandese abbiamo combattuto tantissimo perché loro dicevano no, non è necessario puntare al recupero della persona tossicodipendente, lasciamo pure che questa persona cronicizzi. Quest'anno l'Italia, probabilmente voi lo sapete, sta ultimando una risoluzione sulle problematiche gender oriented, cioè per fare in modo che gli Stati pongano particolare attenzione alle problematiche delle donne tossicodipendenti o dalle donne che fanno un uso occasionale di droghe. In questa fase di percorso, questa risoluzione verrà presentata il prossimo marzo a Vienna. La nostra risoluzione è sottoposta alla procedura di tutti gli Stati dell'Unione Europea. Questo vuol dire che ogni Stato può fare dei commenti e la risoluzione è in continuazione cambiata. Io l'altro ieri ho ricevuto una telefonata dal governo olandese che mi diceva che assolutamente dobbiamo inserire una postilla che ricordi l'importanza degli interventi di early detection, early intervention e del recovery della persona tossicodipendente. Questo appunto sta a giustificare il fatto come siano in cambiamento le politiche e l'approccio olandese.
E San Paolo fulminato sulla via di Damasco, più o meno, visto che siamo a Roma. Sì, io... Prego. Devi premere il bottoncino, se no le interpreti non possono tradurti. Grazie.
Sono il dottor Cesarini, capo dipartimento delle dipendenze Roma Centro e ho come competenza anche il carcere di Regina Coeli, che è il carcere giudiziario di Roma. Noi normalmente nell'ambito dell'ambiente penitenziario da noi è previsto il trattamento con farmaci sostitutivi, diciamo anche senza dei termini fissati, quindi facciamo trattamenti molto lunghi. Volevo sapere dal giudice se invece in America è previsto trattamenti prolungati con farmaci sostitutivi gratuitamente dati. In carcere, certo. Grazie.
Thank you. The issue of medical-assisted treatment is somewhat starting to become new for us judges in the United States. Many of the judges are uncomfortable with medical-assisted treatment because I think they haven't had sufficient education at this point as to the benefits of having medical-assisted treatment. As far as what is happening in the correction system in our prisons, again, people are prescribed medications in prison for specific needs. I'm not sure if they are, at this point, at least in my state, are using certain types of medications to treat substance abuse issues alone. But again, that is an evolving issue in our country and our states, sir, and I think it's something that as judges we're going to have to become much more educated on. Because the idea, if I'm sure you understand, is as judges will look at this and say, well, really what you're doing is you're substituting one substance for another. And the goal, of course, is abstinence, as far as many judges are concerned. So that's a developing issue, but it's a great question, and we are starting to deal with that more and more in our country.
Bene, prego.
Starnini per il Dipartimento dell'Amministrazione Penitenziaria. Le drug court mi sembra di aver capito che sono un'alternativa obbligatoria. Se non si accetta il programma si va in carcere. Assomigliano abbastanza un po' alla messa alla prova nella giustizia minorile. Ecco, noi in Italia stiamo lavorando, d'accordo ovviamente con il Dipartimento Politica Antidroghe, per diminuire al massimo il numero di persone tossicodipendenti negli istituti penitenziari. Il problema è le risorse sia dei servizi pubblici e le risorse delle comunità. Tengo però a precisare che per esempio il costo di una persona detenuta in Italia è di 200 euro al giorno, quindi forse è anche un problema di allocazione delle risorse. Ecco, questa è anche una provocazione che mando al Dipartimento Politico Antidroghe. Grazie.
Thank you very much, sir. Again, that's a great question. The reality, particularly for our adult drug courts, as I've indicated, we have presumptive sentencing guidelines for certain types of drug offenses. And some of those are what they call a presumptive commit to our prison system. An attorney can request a dispositional departure, which means that that person would not go to prison under certain conditions. The conditions are primarily that they're amenable to probation. One of the key questions of amenability to probation is whether or not they can be successfully treated, chemical dependency-wise. So what will happen many times, and you are correct, that is somewhat compulsory, because if you're looking at a situation where you're saying, I may go to prison for 4 years, or should I get involved with this drug court for 14 to 16 months, I may choose the drug court. So what happens is the defense attorneys will talk to the prosecutor, and the defense attorney will say, I'd like to get my client into a drug court, and that's going to require a dispositional departure from prison. Is that agreeable to you, Madam Prosecutor or Mr. Prosecutor? The prosecutor will then make a decision whether or not they want to have that person go into a drug court or not. And if they do, then we have an agreement, if you will, compulsory somewhat, that they will come into our drug court. But the key is that they have to comply strictly to the terms of the drug court. They sign an agreement indicating they'll comply with the terms of the drug court. And if they fail, what happens is more likely than not they're going back to prison after some graduated sanctions. Not immediately, but at some point they'll go back into the prison system. As Kevin had indicated, Dr. Sabet had indicated, one of the strengths we have is we have the hammer of prison, for lack of a better term, if you will, to force compliance in recovery sometimes. And that's difficult in our juvenile drug courts because we don't have that hammer. They don't go to prison, obviously. So that is more of a voluntary type program, and many times it's encouraged by their parents to get them in a juvenile drug court because the parents are tired of dealing with the overall issues of that child's substance abuse. So that will happen. So to answer your question specifically, I would say it's somewhat compulsory, even though the final decision is made by the defendant, his attorney, as well as the prosecutor. We don't force someone into drug court as a judge unless they want to come into the program, because the concern we have is that they may not be a successful candidate for long-term treatment.
Grazie. Rispetto alla provocazione che faceva nei confronti del Dipartimento, che poi non è una provocazione ma è uno stimolo positivo, direi, no? Io credo che sia necessario, quando si parla di costi, fare delle analisi che non sono così dirette. Anche poi dirò 2 parole sul discorso del presunto risparmio nel legalizzare le sostanze, no? Noi ci siamo occupati di modellistica economica finanziaria per andare a capire esattamente le cose. Diciamo che se un detenuto costa 200 euro al mese, questa è la cifra che hai dato tu, no? Sono prevalentemente costi diretti dovuti e legati alla gestione delle carceri, in realtà poi i costi indiretti legati al trattamento, tra virgolette, alberghiero, che vitto, alloggio, eccetera, sono molto più ridotti. Quindi in realtà il problema non è che si risolva di costo se noi riduciamo il numero delle persone, perché quello che ci costa sono gli stipendi al 70% e le strutture, no? Ma questo per una correttezza semplicemente metodologica. Quindi il problema vero è quello di modificare le procedure dell'entrata in carcere e quindi creare delle condizioni che poi possono, tipo queste, ma dopo vanno chiaramente adattate, che possano queste persone essere riabilitate, perché il vero costo che paghiamo come società, e sto parlando di costi nel senso di euro, no? È la perdita di produttività che hanno queste persone e le cure necessarie che bisogna poi in qualche modo fare, no? Perché comunque un tossicodipendente ha dei problemi sanitari, se in più ha qualche infezione da HIV, pensate che dal 12 al 15% più o meno ci sono infezioni da HIV, l'infezione da HIV, un trattamento mensile con una terapia antiretrovirale può andare dai 700 ai 1200 euro al mese solo di farmaci, che in Italia sono gratuiti, ma li paga il contribuente, quindi l'investimento che noi dobbiamo fare è un investimento. Noi abbiamo appena finito un'analisi economica, anche perché appunto oggi, avendo io l'incontro col Presidente Monti, credo che vorrà delle rendicontazioni anche su queste cose, no? E devo dire che sono enormi le spese che noi dobbiamo affrontare se non curiamo queste persone. Attualmente per tenere in cura così com'è, senza dare giudizi sulla terapia, sono circa 180.000 persone in terapia, ci costano circa 1 miliardo all'anno, con un rendimento per andare veramente per grossi indicatori, no, in cui il 70% di queste persone in terapia non usa sostanze in un anno. Questo è il rendimento del sistema, però ne abbiamo fuori altre 220.000 con tossicodipendenza. Ecco, quelle persone lì che non trattiamo, pur col rendimento del 70%, come abbiamo detto, tutti i giorni andranno a spendere dai 50 ai 200 euro di sostanze. E questo crea per 365 giorni un volume miliardario di soldi che vanno alle organizzazioni criminali. Però, e mi riaggancio a quello che è un po' la domanda che ha fatto lei, no, nel fatto della legalizzazione e del fatto quindi che si abbasserebbero gli introiti alle mafie. No. Ecco, su questa cosa qui ci sono vari modi di agire, perché noi possiamo trattare le persone, possiamo curare queste persone e quindi abbattere una domanda di droga in senso, oltre a questo, quelle persone possono essere riabilitate e generano un introito produttivo, generano una produzione autonoma e quindi generano reddito che va dai 20 ai 30.000 euro all'anno. Do delle cifre veramente grossolane, ma poi possiamo entrare nei particolari. Quindi l'investimento che si potrebbe fare al contrario dicendo, beh, ma legalizziamo, a parte che voglio vedere che cosa legalizziamo, quali sostanze, chi ha accesso e a chi diamo accesso a queste sostanze, perché il problema è, io ho visto, e cito una cosa molto presente, c'è una proposta di legge in Senato, che se voi andate a leggere, di legalizzazione in cui si prevede la possibilità di coltivare, cedere e utilizzare cannabis per tutte le persone che hanno dai 16 anni in su. Allora, voi comprendete che questo è poi, al di là della questione etica, se volete, o quella che chiamatela come volete, anche da un punto di vista poi di realizzazione di questi sistemi. E quelli che hanno meno di 16 anni, e per la cocaina e l'eroina che cosa facciamo? Perché il problema poi si scontra con delle questioni molto pratiche. Se noi vietiamo solo una cosa e non legalizziamo tutto, non liberalizziamo tutto, no, si creeranno dei mercati paralleli. Il primo problema. Il secondo problema, le organizzazioni criminali hanno una capacità competitiva con lo Stato di produrre sostanze a bassissimo prezzo, sostenendo anche, se vogliamo, una distribuzione gratuita competitiva per qualche mese o anno, che è inimmaginabile. Il prodotto delle organizzazioni criminali che dovrebbe essere messo in vendita, che è messo attualmente in vendita, scusate, è un prodotto che non segue le regole igieniche di produzione che può seguire e che deve seguire uno Stato su queste cose qua. Quindi i costi che noi come Stato dovremmo in qualche modo sostenere per creare una catena di produzione, di distribuzione e di controllo di queste sostanze sono inimmaginabili. Comunque con la crisi economica che c'è vi assicuro che il Presidente Monti non affronterebbe mai questo costo. No, su questo lo posso dare per certo. Insomma, ecco, dobbiamo in qualche maniera fare poi perché è molto seduttivo, io lo considero veramente una seduzione, il fatto di dire lasciamo che la gente acquisti o diamo noi queste sostanze così noi riusciamo a combattere le organizzazioni criminali così. Non è mai successo da nessuna parte, non c'è una prova scientifica, anzi dicono il contrario, alcuni studi che hanno fatto negli Stati Uniti, e Mineta vedo che vuole intervenire, quindi lasciamo pure la parola anche a lui.
Thank you, Professor. The other part that I think is another seductive part of the discussion around legalization is also raising of tax revenue. One of the problems that we have is that the consequences, our national drug control policy is around also looking at the consequences of use. And the consequences of use far outweigh that we can see the taxes that could be raised under the legalization of marijuana. Being from California, I was, we were intimately involved with the effects, at least that we could see locally, of 1996 of the medicinal use of marijuana in our state. What's happened more recently, though, is that access among the youth where I lived to high-grade marijuana at very low cost, if not for free, has expanded greatly. And as a trustee in a local high school district on a school board, I was very concerned about how our kids were doing educationally, and particularly the kids who actually were smoking a lot of marijuana. And we found, or at least we had great concern around educational achievement and lack thereof, and increased levels of use of, underage drinking, marijuana, synthetics, prescription drug problems, a whole host of problems. And again, increased access had very severe problems for us around youth use. And it's something that I would point out that is one of the areas that around the discussion on legalization, the area just on what happens to the kids and the effect in their lives on brain development, on educational achievement, on overall health is very critical in that discussion.
Grazie. C'è qualche altra domanda? Prego.
Valerio Profeta, Abruzzo. Volevo soltanto sapere, a questo programma Drug Court si può accedere solo una volta o anche in occasione di successivi reati?
The criteria for drug courts are basically done by assessment. What we find many times, for example, a person may come into court, say, on a felony theft charge. And the underlying crime may not have anything to do with alcohol or drugs per se when you first look at it. But then when they are assessed and they start doing background evaluations, they determine that they may have a chemical dependency issue, and that the theft was actually for the purposes of trying to get money to buy drugs. But that's, when it comes before the court initially, that's not what it looks like. So when they do evaluations, then they determine, again, based upon the criminogenic needs, as they talk about, the high-risk, high-need offender. Then, again, what would happen with that person, they can be referred into a drug court. Again, the defense attorney would be involved talking to that client. The prosecutor would be involved and see if they would be a good fit for drug court. And then the court makes the ultimate decision whether or not to put them in the program or not. So to answer your question specifically, many types of crimes can come into the drug court, but the underlying issue, of course, has to be the need for recovery as well as judicial intervention, but for a long period of time.
And just one other thing, too, on that.
in terms of the courts. In the U.S., we also have other kinds of problem-solving courts. We have mental health courts, where somebody with a mental illness has a specialized court. We haven't talked about that. We also have veterans court. You know, people who are coming from war have very unique disorders. I mean, we can talk about the substance use disorders with the prescription drug abuse and suicide. We would need a whole week to have a conference on that right now. It's a huge problem in the United States, post-war trauma leading to overdose and overuse of prescription drugs. But there are courts for veterans, people coming back from war who have committed crimes or have issues. There are specialized courts. So this is actually a whole movement. I mean, you can all look it up on the internet. It's a whole movement of specialized courts that are very, very interesting.
And just to follow up with what Dr. Savet had indicated, sir, again, we have family dependency treatment courts. We have juvenile drug courts. We have DWI courts relating to repeat DWI or drunk driving offenders. Reentry drug courts for those that are coming back from prison into society to try to have a reentry program that gives them the most chance of success. We have tribal healing courts for the Native Americans population in the United States that have a different culture on how they look at alcohol and drugs. And federal reentry drug courts is something we've started recently. Again, to try to get those persons back into the community in a safe and manageable way to give them the best chance of success.
Ok, siamo arrivati alla fine. Io concludo in maniera molto sintetica con i ringraziamenti di rito. Credo che tutti noi siamo molto soddisfatti relativamente a quello che è la collaborazione e le cose che sono state dette oggi dai nostri colleghi americani, che ringraziamo di essere venuti in Italia a parlare con noi, a mostrarci la loro esperienza, sicuramente a stimolarci delle idee e trovare poi ancora un nuovo entusiasmo nel fare cose nuove anche in Italia. Per quanto riguarda il lavoro che noi ci proponiamo di fare su questa base, sulla base di questa cooperazione, sicuramente porteremo avanti adesso dei progetti specifici che riguardano, sono già stati individuati, come vi dicevo ieri, voi non c'eravate ma ve lo ripeto, il nostro Ministro ha dato come priorità il carcere e la prevenzione, quindi abbiamo già sviluppato dei progetti che potremmo ulteriormente finanziare nel corso del 2012 fino a valere nel 2013 e per quanto riguarda la prevenzione faremo estremamente tesoro, credo, di tutte le varie cose che sono state dette, che sono estremamente interessanti e che hanno rafforzato la nostra convinzione che il piano d'azione che abbiamo scritto, così come è stato anche definito dal collega Jack Stein, è un buon piano d'azione. Si tratta adesso di renderlo ancora più diffuso e ancora più sostenuto in termini di finanziamenti. La nota dolente dei finanziamenti noi la stiamo affrontando e su questo avremo chiaramente tutto l'appoggio anche del nostro Presidente del Consiglio con delle tecniche di fundraising, come si dice in termine, se volete, un po' più altisonante, ma in realtà si tratta solo di cacciare i soldi, cioè di portare a casa dei fondi dove in qualche modo ci sono, che prevedono fondamentalmente l'utilizzo molto più forte, perché ad oggi è tuttora inesistente, dei fondi europei dedicati a queste cose qui, quindi stiamo sviluppando delle attività di formazione anche per poter avere la progettualità europea, perché non è semplice, i progettisti italiani e gli operatori italiani non sono abituati nella maggior parte a fare queste cose qua. Qualche organizzazione sicuramente sì, ma la maggior parte, per esempio le regioni, non riescono ad avere grandi progetti o finanziamenti da questo punto di vista, e sono parecchi miliardi di euro che sono sul tavolo e quindi sarebbe necessario svilupparla questa cosa qua. La seconda cosa che noi intendiamo fare, e ne abbiamo già attivato uno, è quello di attuare una regola fondamentale che è chi sbaglia paga, cioè vuol dire che andiamo ad attivare in tutti quelli, che l'abbiamo già fatto con chi trasgredisce l'articolo 187 e 186 del codice della strada, cioè guidare in stato di ebbrezza o sotto l'effetto di sostanze, paga un'ammenda aggiuntiva che va dagli 80 ai 300 euro più o meno, e questa ammenda aggiuntiva va a rimpinguare un fondo presso il nostro Dipartimento, che sono per il momento del primo annualità, prevediamo dai 4 ai 5 milioni di euro all'anno più o meno, che non sono pochi, per poter fare progettualità nell'ambito della prevenzione, nell'ambito dello sviluppo e della ricerca. La stessa cosa la vorremmo attivare con per esempio il gambling. Voi sapete, non ne abbiamo parlato oggi, ma noi abbiamo un grosso problema di sviluppo di gambling patologico all'interno del Paese, dovuto anche alla grande pubblicità che è stata fatta negli ultimi anni. Bene, noi abbiamo chiesto, e io lo richiederò oggi al Presidente, che, visto che è poi anche colui che ha la responsabilità sui monopoli di Stato, no, che una parte delle vincite, quindi del payoff, di quello che viene distribuito, e guardate che sono oltre 47 miliardi di euro all'anno, non è una cifretta, no? E invece di far godere i cittadini con queste vincite, diciamo che dall'1 al 2% potrebbero essere dedicati ad un fondo che va a sviluppare progetti di prevenzione, cura e riabilitazione e soprattutto sostegno alle famiglie, perché dietro al problema del gambling c'è anche il problema dello strozzinaggio, c'è il problema delle organizzazioni criminali che poi ricattano queste persone. E quindi questo praticamente è quello che stiamo tentando come paese, tra virgolette, abbastanza povero di risorse in questo momento. Io mi vergogno a dirlo, ma è giusto che si sappia, quindi lo dico: il Dipartimento conta su un finanziamento per sviluppare progetti in proprio dalla Presidenza di 6,5 milioni di euro. Ecco, fate i vostri conti, noi siamo comunque estremamente vivaci e non ci facciamo sicuramente intimidire dal fatto che non abbiamo tanti soldi, no? Organizzeremo una lotteria pro antidroga, va bene? Ringrazio ancora i presenti, le amministrazioni presenti e la pazienza, grazie. Ringrazio anche le interpreti che per questi 2 giorni hanno fatto un lavoro eccezionale e stanno nella cabina.